Okay, folks, we will be getting started here momentarily. We are live streaming on Facebook, Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and a couple others. Sorry about that. I hope that didn't cause any feedback for you guys. Technical difficulties there. Forgot to mute one of my tabs. Anyways, so we are streaming on all those platforms. We are live. This is News for Us World's Fringe Division podcast, episode 4, our Stolen History Part 2, where we will be reviewing and going over some analysis with Dottie on Part 3 of Stolen History, the Mystery of the World's Fairs. So with that being said, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channels, Rumble channel, Facebook pages, like our Facebook pages, follow them. Also check out our news4us.world website. You can also view all our content there, as well as our latest articles and our launch article. We are a grassroots news organization by the people for the people. We do not believe in censorship. We believe in free speech, and all of our content that we are streaming today is covered under Section 107 of the Fair Use Clause. So we are not for profit. We are doing this on volunteering our time to do this because we like to. It's our passion. This is what we love to do. So, this is our this is what we love, and somebody's got to do it. So we're doing this for information and educational purposes. I'm specifying this for Facebook because they censored our last freaking episode due to a bullshit copyright claim when clearly we're covered under fair use. So I'm just making that clear for you guys on Facebook, all right? Or fake book, I should say. Anyways, now that I got that out of the way, let us begin. And also don't forget to check out our Bonfire store at bonfire.com/FU-family-court/. That's just one of the Bonfire stores. There's also another one called just-TD. So you can also check that out. All the money goes straight to the Family Court, CBS Family Court Corruption Victims Fund. We do not profit from any of this. This goes to help the victims. So let's start. Welcome, everybody. We are live, and we're good. We're good to go. So today we're going to be previewing the episode, part 3 of Stolen History, which is part of a 3-part series on that we came across on YouTube, and Dottie's been looking into that and investigating that particular documentary series. So she's going to be doing a presentation and kind of like giving us her perspective on that, what she's learned and what she's dug up regarding what she found, that backs up what they're claiming in this part 3 of Stolen History, Mystery of the World's Fairs. So I'm really excited to see this and see what she has to show us, because this is going to be like entertainment for me, and even new to me, because I have no idea what she's got coming or what she's found. So this is going to be surprising to me as well, because I'm right there with you guys, the audience. So this is, I'm excited. So let's begin, and we will, let me share my screen so I can start our presentation. Let me find the video first. Sorry. Should have had it up beforehand, but things don't ever always quite go how you expect on a live, because you have unforeseen circumstances that can pop up or arise. People, might be able to get a hold of somebody, stuff like that, just little stuff, but no biggie, because we're going to keep pushing forward because the show must go on. All right, so here we go.
Wake up. What do we really know about our past? Are we suffering from a collective memory loss? Was there a technically advanced unified civilization on Earth less than 500 years ago? What role did the World's Fairs play in introducing forgotten technology?
How long do you generally sleep each night, Mr. Footy? 8 hours? 441,504,000 seconds of time you just throw away.
Did someone secretly destroy remnants of old world structures under the pretense of a temporary exposition? Nothing is as it seems. It's time for us to remember again and lift the veil of deception. Introduction.
In order to understand the spiritual background typical of every non-modern civilization, it is necessary to retain the idea that the opposition between historical times and prehistoric or mythological times is the qualitative and substantial opposition between times that are not of the same kind. If modern man until recently had conceived and extolled the meaning of history as evolution, as higher development, the truth known by traditional man was exactly the opposite. In all the ancient testimonies of traditional mankind, one can find again and again, in one way or another, the thought of a regression, of a fall. From originally higher stages, we have descended to stages more and more conditioned by the human, mortal, and accidental element. To assert, as one must traditionally assert, that in the beginning there existed not an animal-like caveman, but a more than man, and that even ancient prehistory knows not only culture, but even an era of gods, means purest mythology to many who believe in the gospel of Darwinism.
In the previous part, The Destruction of the Old World, we explained how social conditions changed abruptly as a result of a cataclysmic event, be it a natural disaster or a war or both, loosely between the early 18th and the late 19th century. This event is also known as the Reset. The Industrial Revolution was one of the most obvious consequences of this reset. After the disappearance of the old world, a power vacuum arose that was exploited by a small power elite to disempower the old kingdoms. They divided the world among themselves through imperialism and the establishment of modern nation-states. In the course of industrialization, the invisible ruling powers were faced with the challenge of convincing the masses of their secret plans. The world exhibitions were created as a way to reach this goal. In all likelihood, these exhibitions were created to introduce certain technologies into society, or rather, to reintroduce them. The first major World's Fair was held in London in 1851, consistent with the role of the British Crown as a major political player at the time. 1851 must therefore be regarded as a symbolic year for the peak of the Industrial Revolution. Supposedly, a third of the entire population of Britain, 6 million people, visited the great exhibition of the works of industry of all nations. However, the transfer of knowledge and technology targeted by these exhibitions may have begun as early as the 1840s. The French Industrial Exhibition, held in Paris in 1844, was considered a precursor to the Great London World's Fair of 1851. In Germany, World's Fairs were usually called trade and industry exhibitions, although Germany played a rather minor role compared to the others. It should be noted that this also applies to Germany's role as a colonial power. European policy has always been clearly directed against Germany and the German population. The reasons for this remain speculative. Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and America, controlled by the British Crown, should be considered the most important players of the Industrial Age. These countries, already mostly controlled by the cabal at the time, hosted virtually all of the world's fairs. The term cabal describes the hierarchical, monolithic organization operating out of secrecy, which has its roots in the ancient mystery cults. This cabal was able to spread across the earth like a spider's web, especially after the last reset. Shortly before his death, John F. Kennedy likely referred to this very cabal when he said,
"For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed."
Who exactly was Kennedy referring to here? Is it merely the danger of communism, as is often claimed? Or could he have been referring to the group that UFO researcher Richard Dolan has dubbed the breakaway civilization? Although Kennedy may have been a part of this cabal, his words still ring true. Ultimately, the elite control all sides through the dialectic process, where the world is a stage and they pull the strings. Just as the aristocratic elite were replaced by a new political power structure during the French Revolution, in our time, there are also pre-planned power struggles that appear natural to the uninitiated observer. On a political level, we know this under the name COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program. It refers to the infiltration of political groups by the FBI during the early days of the Cold War. Nowadays, the term controlled opposition is most often used to describe resistance movements being deliberately built and controlled in order to neutralize the energy of the masses and channel it into activities acceptable to the elite. The process of dialectics, i.e. the study of opposites and their resolution, is a fundamental aspect of mass psychology.
The world is possible. We are unstoppable.
Usually on emotionally loaded issues, the masses split into two opposite poles, thus creating a field of tension. To control people, it is necessary to control both poles of this field. By controlling both poles, thesis and antithesis, the desired synthesis outcome can be predicted. The Kennedy assassination was a sort of alchemical process, as the American authors James Shelby Downard and Michael Hoffman describe in their work King Kill 33. The regicide is an ancient magical ritual that creates social renewal. Ritual regicide is well studied in research, see René Girard, James Fraser, and is found in all ages and societies. Big media events are, according to Downard and Hoffman, largely planned beforehand with the sole purpose to transform humanity. In the alchemical sense, it is about dissolving the divinely predetermined order to create a satanic order, solve et coagula. For this purpose, such media-staged psychodrama is essential to reach the masses. Besides John F. Kennedy, we also see these staged dramas in the deaths of Princess Diana and Michael Jackson. Collective energy is built up to channel and ritually sacrifice the hope of the masses. We can observe this process again at present. If you are attentive, you can see in the current political developments all the signs of an artificial transformation of society orchestrated by shock. The uprooting from the past is the foundation for all further developments. Manly P. Hall, Freemason and initiated occultist, writes in his book, the adepts in the Western esoteric tradition.
The alchemical tradition contains all the elements of a world program of enlightenment and reform. It requires only a superficial acquaintance with the philosophy and literature of alchemy in order to sense the magnitude of this concealed project. The alchemical laboratory became the shrine of the spiritual sciences, taking the place of the ruined sanctuaries of the ancient mysteries.
Now let's return to the breakaway civilization. This term was coined by Richard Dolan in his book UFOs and the National Security State. He came to the conclusion that an elite group with access to high technology and secret knowledge has followed its own path of development, independent of the rest of humanity. This allowed a parallel civilization to establish itself on Earth that we know little about today. According to Dolan, they probably live in huge interconnected underground bases. They are financed by black budgets, the visible part of which is called the deep state, but their structures go much deeper. They have their own view of the cosmos and our place in the world, of our history and our origins. They keep their knowledge secret, and much of their work is to keep the public ignorant. To quote Richard Dolan,
"There is a clandestine group that possesses technology that is vastly superior to that of the mainstream world, the ability to explore areas of our world and surroundings presently unavailable to the rest of us. They have scientific and cosmological understandings that give them greater insights into the nature of our world, and a significant built-off-the-grid infrastructure, partially underground, that affords them a high degree of secrecy and independence of action. In our own official world history, you go back 200 years and compare levels of technology from Europe to, say, Central Africa, and you're talking about two vastly different ways of understanding the world. So really, what is the difficulty in understanding that a classified, secret scientific community would make radical breakthroughs that they wouldn't share? I don't think it's outrageous. And I do think this has happened since World War II. Now, one of the breakthroughs they've made is in what we call anti-gravity technology. Could this have happened in the 19th century? I don't think that it's impossible in theory. I have speculated privately many times whether there has been a secret breakaway group going back to ancient times. When you look at some of the really puzzling mysteries of our ancient world, whether it's the Great Pyramid of Giza or Machu Picchu, there are elements of those and other architectural sites that have been left behind that, to me at least, don't make a whole lot of sense in the context of human society as it then was supposed to have existed. The Great Pyramid doesn't make sense to me in terms of 2,500 years ago ancient Egyptian culture. I wonder if this was a human construct at the time, and what human civilization are we talking about here?
Could it be that this civilization, split off from our official historical line of development, is behind many of the events of the 20th century? And what of the World's Fairs? Were a large proportion of the World's Fair buildings actually built from scratch, as the official historiography claims? There is much to suggest that the robber barons of the industrial age not only hid once widespread technological knowledge from us, but that they also hijacked some of the impressive architectural masterpieces in which parts of this knowledge was displayed. Some of the buildings from the World's Fairs still exist today, and they are obviously not made of plaster or similar fragile materials. Were they subsequently rebuilt to be permanent structures? Is it even possible that the elaborately designed expo sites were built with the technological capabilities of the time within just a few months, only to be destroyed again a few months later after the exhibitions had ended? Or is it plausible that after a great catastrophe, the worldwide remains of the preceding high culture were not only systematically destroyed, but also pressed into an image of history imposed on us? Some available information suggests that even after the worldwide game-changing event we call the Reset or Mud Flood, there still remained countless complete and beautiful cities that were conquered, by a new power elite and then repurposed as World's Fairs. Especially in America, the so-called New World, the many Greco-Roman cities would have been difficult to explain because, in contrast to Europe, the Americans do not have an official Greco-Roman history. The more carefully one investigates, the more difficult it becomes to find plausible explanations for the construction and destruction of these extraordinary and huge exhibition areas. The official version about the World's Fairs can be summarized as follows. People in the 19th century loved Greco-Roman architecture for reasons unknown, so it was extremely important to the architects who organized the World's Fairs between 1850 and about 1914 to build in a classical style. Note, with World War I, classical architectural ambitions in Europe ended abruptly, and many exhibitions also did not take place as planned. It was only in the wake of fascism that there was a return to ancient design principles, but these were often implemented superficially and were mainly applied to a few representative, magnificent buildings. After the Second World War, on the other hand, classical architecture was deliberately replaced with new trends, e.g. Bauhaus and brutalism. Officially, the intention was to create an aesthetic distance to fascism, but in all likelihood, its purpose was to cut the connection to the old world through soulless, brutalistic architecture. No effort was spared for the World's Fairs. Enormous amounts of work went into creating complex statues, ornaments, columns, parks, buildings, and even the world's largest organs. No expenses were spared in the making of these massive structures. Made of plaster and linen or hemp fibers, they were only intended to last for the duration of the expo. However, the attention to detail was so great that purely visually there seemed to be no difference between the expo buildings and the classical splendor buildings of antiquity. The purpose of the World's Fairs was to make the supposedly new technologies discovered during the Industrial Revolution palatable to the masses, to create new markets. In the end, most of the buildings were torn down, with only meadows or empty parks remaining. Funding. Quite a few fairs were enormous monetary losses. This is astonishing in that the initial motivation for the exhibition supposedly came from the industrialists themselves. The investment deficits could indicate that the fairs had a hidden agenda that was not profit-oriented. Berlin, Germany, 1896.
With an investment volume of 10 million Reichsmarks, the trade exhibition closed with a deficit of 2 million Reichsmarks, which Berlin's economy was left with. Unlike the accompanying colonial exhibition, which enjoyed generous state support from the Foreign Office, the trade exhibition had to manage without financial contributions.
Lübeck, Germany, 1895.
Although a total of 750,000 visitors came, the German Nordic Trade and Industry Exhibition closed with a financial deficit. The exhibition buildings were completely demolished after the end of the event, and a residential area was created on the Marley site, which became part of the Lübeck suburb of St. Gertrude, which was developed in terms of urban development in the first half of the 20th century.
Nuremberg, Germany, 1906.
Despite the 2.5 million visitors, the Bavarian Jubilee exhibition of 1906 is a financial loss for Nuremberg.
St. Louis, USA, 1904.
In the end, the expo made a loss of $8.5 million. This is the equivalent of more than $250 million today.
Philadelphia, USA, 1926.
The exhibition attracted far fewer visitors than the 10 million originally planned. In the end, it was unable to service its debts and went bankrupt in 1927.
Now let's take a closer look at some of these expos. Panama Pacific International Exposition, USA, 1915. When the Panama Pacific International Exposition opened in 1915, European nations were already entangled in the First World War. The annihilation of the old monarchies had begun. The European continent was being reshaped, and all areas of government, society, economy, and culture were undergoing fundamental change. The city of San Francisco itself was just recovering from the terrible earthquakes and fires that had raged in 1906. Yet, in the midst of these hectic times, an exposition, unimaginably large by today's standards, opened its doors to celebrate the completion of the Panama Canal in August 1914. The fairgrounds covered 600 acres and 2.5 miles along the waterfront, receiving nearly 20 million visitors between February 20th and December 4th, 1915, making it one of the most successful expositions of the time. Because of its size and expansive grounds, it was virtually impossible for guests to see the entire fair, even after multiple visits. Most of the buildings, it is said, were made of wood, plaster, and linen fiber in order to keep costs as low as possible and to be able to demolish them quickly once the World's Fair was over. However, if we take a closer look at some of the photos of these brand new buildings, doubts about the official story quickly arise. Many buildings, for example, show signs of age shortly after completion and appear to be heavily eroded, such as the Fountain of the Earth. If the official origin story is coherent, shouldn't these buildings have looked brand new? Instead, from the very beginning, we are looking at ancient monuments that might as well have come from the fabled Atlantis or ancient Rome. The architect of the Palace of Fine Arts, Bernard R. Maybeck, is quoted as saying that every great city needs ruins. That's why the palace was supposed to fall into disrepair after the expo ended, some of whose structures were really only meant to last for the duration of the exhibition. It is said that even as it was being built, it was inspired by Roman overgrown ruins, in keeping with the mood of 18th century Piranesi engravings, who became famous for his painting of ruins. But isn't the palace still holding up remarkably well in this photo from 1919, a full 4 years after the expo ended? Where are the weather-related signs of decay? There are further contradictions. Allegedly, all buildings were only cheaply and quickly raised from the plaster, but the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium still stands today. Unlike the Palace of Fine Arts, it was never fundamentally renovated or rebuilt, so it has always been made of solid stone, even according to the official narrative. Let us now turn our attention once again to the Palace of Fine Arts and let some contemporary witnesses have their say. Professor von Noppen of Columbia University noted that
the Palace of Fine Arts is so sublime, so majestic, and is the product of such imagination that it would have graced the age of Pericles.
Thomas Edison was also full of enthusiasm.
The architect of that building is a genius. There is nothing equal anywhere on Earth.
Are these really statements one would expect to hear about a newly constructed contemporary building of plaster and linen? And Louis Christian Molgart, one of the architects of the exposition, told the Commonwealth Club,
"When the exposition buildings are torn down, then we will have destroyed one of the greatest architectural units which has ever been created in the history of the world.
It's hard to believe that he was merely talking about temporary new buildings. Toward the end of his life, the famous Molgart ended up impoverished in the insane asylum at Stockton, California. Is it possible that he could never really live with the lie of having claimed the creation of various architectural masterpieces? A wealthy San Francisco citizen, Phoebe Apperson Hearst, wife of industrialist robber baron George Hearst, founded the Palace Preservation League while the expo was still running, and it was only thanks to this effort that the palace was not demolished. Her son, the publisher of the San Francisco Examiner, William Randolph Hearst, contributed to the success of the campaign. But the official story goes like this.
Although the palace was saved from demolition, its structure was not stable. Originally intended to last only for the duration of the exhibition, the colonnade and rotunda were not built of durable materials, but were framed with wood and then covered with rods, a mixture of plaster and linen-like fibers. As a result of construction and vandalism, the simulated ruin was indeed a crumbling ruin by the 1950s.
So we are to believe that the Palace Preservation League went to great lengths to save a temporary ruin from destruction. More likely is the following scenario. The palace was never rebuilt, only renovated, because it was a normal, permanent building. In the official narrative, the renovation from 1964 onwards was then possibly turned into the creation of a new permanent building. On the original photos from the time after the expo, columns made of wood and plaster are clearly visible. So, if the video material hasn't been manipulated, it indicates that the Palace of Fine Arts was indeed a modern and temporary new building made of cheap materials. However, to get a better idea of the temporary materials used at this point, let us take a look at the correspondence of Bernard Maybeck, the alleged architect of the Palace of Fine Arts, with an Australian architect named Walter Burley Griffin. In this correspondence, Maybeck suggests to Griffin that, just as with the Panama Pacific International Exposition, the new Australian capital should be built of wood and stucco to generate public enthusiasm for classicist architecture and then, by means of public support, be able to finish the city with durable materials. Griffin frostily informed Maybeck, however, that
Plaster or stucco are hardly considered as temporary expedients in Australia, for they are largely employed for buildings both commercial and governmental, already deemed to be permanent.
this shows how absurd the idea is to classify buildings as temporary just because they are clad in stucco. Countless houses of the German Gründerzeit and the American Gilded Age consist mainly of stucco, plaster, and wood. Yet they have already stood for more than 100 years without any major signs of decay. Therefore, two things can be said about the Palace of Fine Arts. While historical and photographic records suggest that solid materials such as stone or cement were not used in the original construction, building with materials such as wood or plaster does not necessarily mean that structures fall apart after a short period of time, which was obviously not the case with the Palace of Fine Arts either. On the contrary, it had to withstand quite a lot, as it was not only used for art exhibitions. During the Second World War, it was used by the military for the storage of trucks and jeeps. Later on, it was used as a storage for other materials and even as a temporary headquarters for the fire brigade. Whether the official construction of the Palace of Fine Arts for the 1915 exposition was just a basic repair or renovation or a new building cannot be said with definitive certainty. On closer examination, we notice a glaring contradiction. The alleged new building was decorated with the symbol of the swastika, which was revered as a good luck charm in old times. However, in the course of World War II, it got practically banned from public use in the USA. So why is it depicted on this new build from the 1960s? Despite the uncertainty, the palace seems to be one of the most popular examples when it comes to exposing the official Expo narrative as a lie. Yet, there are plenty of other, more obvious examples, the most interesting of which we will discuss during this documentary. It appears that the Expo organizers' plan always was to completely destroy everything after the exhibitions ended. However, this often resulted in a public backlash, meaning that at least some of these structures were preserved thanks to the public outcry. For example, the Palace of Fine Arts, the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, and the Japanese Tea House still exist today. But what about the many photos that supposedly show construction and demolition of the world's fairs? It would be relatively easy to document only the demolition of those buildings that were actually only temporarily erected. Furthermore, there is the possibility that the photographs selling us the construction process were actually taken during the demolition of the buildings or during a renovation. Further meticulous research would be needed to arrive at a clearer picture which goes beyond the scope of this documentary. Interestingly, some of the public photo archives have only been put online after websites like stolenhistory.net pointed out inconsistencies in the narrative. For example, the St. Louis Public Library digital collections only just went online in 2019. Northwest German Trade and Industrial Exhibition, Bremen, Germany, 1890. The Northwest German Trade and Industrial Exhibition in Bremen's Burgerpark in 1890 poses a couple of mysteries. This wine house is supposed to be a wooden house and said to be a cheap copy of a real old Hanseatic merchant's house. This is hardly credible as the wine house seems to be embedded in a street of other authentic historical houses. And why was this building actually demolished immediately after the exhibition ended? Even if the house was made entirely of wood, it could have been left standing. 100 years ago, Bremen's architecture was overwhelmingly medieval Hanseatic. Nobody would have thought of imitating a house like this one for exhibition purposes, since the city was full of such houses. The story only makes sense if the real intention was to destroy as many old-world buildings as possible, be it through accidental fires, world exhibitions, or other modernization projects. The most impressive building of the Bremen World's Fair, the multi-story Park House, was also accidentally burned down a few years after the expo. This photo shows a modern steel bridge against the backdrop of historic domed buildings. As the city's newspaper, Weser Courier, notes, not only a strange but an almost paradoxical contrast. This paradox is only resolved if we assume that the steel bridge was actually built for the exhibition, but that the classical buildings were already standing beforehand. In another photo, the ex-director of Bremen's Burgerpark, architect Wilhelm Benck, is shown with a hidden hand, a typical Masonic pose, which, according to Duncan's Ritual and Monitor of Freemasonry, reveals him to be a master of the second veil. The hidden hand likely lets the other initiates know that the individual depicted is part of the secret elite, that his deeds have been sanctioned from above, as well as partially done in secret. Long before the advent of mass media historical figures, Napoleon being one of the most famous, have been depicted in hidden hand portraits. Coincidence? It appears to have been this hidden power that has shaped world events in recent centuries. Shortly after the end of the Bremen exhibition, Wilhelm Benck promptly spoke out and defamed one of the most impressive buildings of the exhibitions, the multi-story Park House. In January 1891, he attacked the building he hated so much publicly in the local newspaper. The debate about the beautiful building only ended when the structure went up in flames in 1907, the official explanation being fireworks that went out of control. The phenomenon that most of the World's Fair's structures mysteriously disappeared is not an isolated case, but can be observed in many of the expos between 1850 and 1920. Was there something to hide? The argument that the buildings were simply poorly built and that they would have inevitably fallen into disrepair quickly is inaccurate, because even today some of the expo buildings are still standing. The solid stone observation tower in Bremen's Burgerpark, for example, was not completely demolished until 1962, mainly because it was badly damaged during World War II. In fact, all of the expo buildings that are still standing today are built so solidly that they hardly age. It is reported of the pavilion of the Bremen cigar company Engelhardt and Biermann, now known as the Waldbühne, that it was destroyed immediately after the exhibition. After all, it was only made of temporary materials, only to be rebuilt true to the original, but this time in a permanent form. We are even told that the cigar company was kind enough to pay for the demolition and rebuilding entirely out of their own pockets. How credible that is, you can decide for yourself. Great Exhibition, London, Great Britain, 1851. The London Crystal Palace Exhibition was the first prominent worldwide industrial exhibition. A whole 28 countries with a total of 17,062 exhibitors on a total area of over 80,000 square meters took part and received about 6 million visitors in 6 months, a quantity comparable to about 1/3 of the total population of Great Britain at that time. To appreciate the full scale, it is necessary to imagine that the gigantic glass house, fitted with cast iron frame elements, was estimated to be 3 times the size of St. Paul's Cathedral or 4 times the size of St. Peter's Basilica. In total, it is said 4,000 tons of iron were processed for columns, trellis girders, and gutters, and about 153,000 square meters of glass were produced. 80 glaziers are said to have installed 18,000 panes in 1 week, and more than 5,000 workers are said to have been employed on the building during the construction phase. A civil engineer remarked about the Crystal Palace,
I'm a civil engineer, and I consider the construction of the Crystal Palace in 39 weeks from approval to opening to be complete nonsense. The glass they apparently had to use is cylinder glass, measuring 1.25 by 0.25 meters, which was very labor-intensive. It had to be blown in a trench, cut, and then polished. So the glass alone would have been impossible to make in the 4 months given. About 153,000 square meters of glass, with no machinery, just horses for power. You couldn't make it in 39 weeks today, let alone in 1850.
Add to this the fact that simple automation processes for the mass production of glass did not develop until 30 years later. So everything had to be produced by hand, and the distance from the glassworks in Smethwick to Hyde Park, where the Crystal Palace was originally built, was around 209 kilometers. And as if all this wasn't fantastic enough, the Glass Palace was completely dismantled after the exhibition and then rebuilt in a larger form in Sydenham Hill and used as a museum there. To bring visitors to the London exhibition site, 2 stations were newly built, both confusingly called Crystal Palace, and differing only in their underground and overground locations, respectively. The fire that destroyed the Crystal Palace in 1936 made the high-level station virtually redundant, which is why it was eventually demolished. The beautifully tiled subway, supposedly built by Italian masons and stonemasons, however, survived. Incidentally, parliamentary buildings made of wood and plaster were erected especially for the Festival of the Empire, which was one of the largest single events in London's Crystal Palace and took place on 12th May 1911. These buildings were also intended to be used only temporarily and were connected by an electric tramway, the so-called all-red route. For example, the replica of the Canadian and New Zealand Parliament buildings, the former visible on the left in the foreground of the Crystal Palace. On November 30th, 1936, however, the Crystal Palace fell victim to a devastating major fire. Michelle Gibson writes about this.
We learned that the Crystal Palace was moved to Sydenham Hill in South London in 1854 and rebuilt, and that it was later destroyed by fire in 1936. How did they manage to move a massive building made of glass panels and cast iron 3 times the size of St. Paul's Cathedral in London to another location? The New York Crystal Palace was also destroyed by fire, but much earlier than the London Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace in New York burned down in 1858, apparently in front of a large audience.
In an article that takes a closer look at these events, it states,
500 firefighters and 90 fire trucks were needed to put it out, and another 749 police officers to control the crowds. Witnesses described, quote, so much molten glass that it looked like a waterfall, even like a Niagara Falls of molten glass. According to one eyewitness, the glass actually caught fire, and when it was really hot, there was a sodium flame, and the molten glass poured straight down. Mrs. Ford from Sydenham described, hot molten glass and metal flowed down the street, and adults formed a human chain and passed buckets of water from hand to hand to stem the flow of hot glass. Another witness recalled that people picked it up and rolled it into balls to keep as souvenirs. However, the 2 towers of the palace are said to have remained standing, even deformed by the fire. The flames were accompanied by clouds of sparks and violent explosions. The reference to the explosions, by the way, is noted only in a few records.
The fire burned with great intensity all night. Even 20 hours later, there were reportedly still pockets of fire. The British press considered the destruction of the Crystal Palace a serious blow to the political power of England, and the public wondered how steel and glass can burn so fiercely. It is important to know that in glass production, the raw materials are heated to about 1,600 to 1,800 degrees Celsius, but finished glass can melt between 600 and 800 degrees Celsius. Cast iron, when compared with other alloys, has a relatively low melting point of around 1,150 degrees Celsius. But the question is where the temperature should have come from and whether furnishings would already have been sufficient to generate heat of this magnitude. Incidentally, there has never been an official investigation into this incident, and the fire is still considered unsolved to this day. Chicago World's Fair, USA, 1893. On May 1st, 1893, the city of Chicago held the World's Columbian Exposition to celebrate the discovery of America by Columbus 400 years earlier. In fact, the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago was to be the largest to date. 70,000 exhibitors from 46 nations were present, 25,000 of them from the USA alone, to present their technical achievements, marking the beginning of a new era. Not only a film projector, the first dishwasher, a fully electric kitchen, an elevated train with electric drive, and a rolling footbridge could be marveled at, but also the amusement park with fairground stalls, circus performers, artificial ice rinks, and an 80-meter-high Ferris wheel attracted numerous visitors. The organizers of the fair
hoped to demonstrate the great industrial might of the United States and symbolize the transfer of leadership from the old world to the new.
Which, given the historical background, may have been a coded message as well, except that the term Old World may mean something different than what we learn nowadays. The Chicago Expo which makes us think involuntarily of ancient Rome, was nicknamed White City and was the inspiration for the Emerald City in the book The Wizard of Oz. Here is one of the sketches that illustrator W.W. Denslow made in response to the Chicago Expo for The Wizard of Oz. The tops of the domes are studded with crystals, hence the name Emerald City in the book. Here, Denslow stands against the backdrop of the Expo site after the devastating fire and on the verge of complete demolition. Interestingly, Indian researcher Praveen Mohan describes in his videos that many ancient Indian temples were originally studded with crystals at the top. Some, like the Somawathiya Pagoda, still have those crystals today. Does The Wizard of Oz contain an unconscious collective memory of humanity, or did Denslow possibly know something that is no longer available to us today? In any case, the Chicago World's Fair was one of the most impressive exhibitions ever in architectural terms. According to the story presented to us, over 200 buildings were built on the shores of Lake Michigan on an area of 278 hectares in only 3 years. Paradoxically, the construction period coincides with the period of economic depression, and the Panic of 1893 was the most severe economic crisis in the history of the United States to date. Who would have thought that in such a time there were enough workers and resources to build an almost paradisiacal city? Were these buildings actually designed by architects Daniel Burnham and Frederick Law Olmsted and meant to be understood as a homage to Greco-Roman architecture? Or did some of them already exist before the Expo began? Were they showing the public the remains of the old world one last time, only to destroy them afterwards? Considering the immense effort that was necessary to construct the buildings, the official explanation hardly seems plausible, especially since there are only a few photos of the construction phase or precise records of the course of the complex construction projects. This discrepancy between the functionality of the building as an exhibition object and the effort of construction is most evident in the colossal Manufacturers and Liberal Arts building. This 200-mile-wide and 500-mile-long building required twice as much steel as the Brooklyn Bridge and was 4 times the size of the Roman Colosseum. It may even have been one of the largest buildings ever built, covering an almost unimaginable area of about 20 football fields. This huge building housed numerous items from manufactories around the world that supposedly represented the level of technical expertise that had emerged since industrialization. This construction alone would have taken years and consumed numerous resources, even if you believe the official narrative of a temporary building. Nevertheless, the building was completely demolished after the Expo. Of the more than 200 buildings, 14 had similar dimensions to the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts building, and they too were almost all destroyed after the 130-day duration of the exhibition. Today, only 2 buildings remain: the so-called Museum of Science and Industry and the World's Congress Auxiliary Building. Considering the high effort of the construction, the question arises why only 2 of these buildings were allowed to remain standing, since other possible uses would have been quite conceivable, and it sounds very unbelievable that such immense resources were simply wasted. The following photo purportedly shows the construction of the administration building. A photographer told us about this.
Without access to the originals, it is difficult to say whether the image here is a true photograph. In this version, however, a pencil drawing was clearly applied. My professional opinion is that all the pictures I have found of this building have been altered in some way. None of these pictures can be used as evidence that the building is under construction. In my opinion, the photos indicate restoration rather than construction, based on the anomalies marked in the photo.
He further notes that the following photos of the construction process are contradictory.
Both photos are presented as evidence of the construction of the building. First of all, I would like to give you a short hint and emphasize that both pictures are misleading in their presentation. In the right picture, the dome appears to be completely finished, while in the left picture, it is clearly not. But in the right photo, the smaller domes that are at each corner of the central part of the building are missing, while in the left photo, with the dome still incomplete, the smaller domes are present. The construction process in the right photo appears to be almost complete. So why would these smaller domes be missing?
Another interesting building at the Columbia Exposition was the main train station on the Expo grounds, whose entire rail system consisted of 35 tracks. By comparison, the main station in Munich, one of the largest stations in Germany, has only 34 tracks. Allegedly, the entire station was only temporary in nature, but it begs the question of how it would even be possible to build a station in such a way that it was stable and functional, but still temporary in nature. The only photo of the alleged construction of the station building shows a building already completely finished amidst mud. It appears to have been nothing more than freshly painted. Of the construction process itself, according to our research, not a single photo exists. A few months after the expo, the station burned to the ground along with other buildings at the exhibition. Cause of the fire? Arson by unknown. The official story is this. A security guard at the expo, conveniently called C. Mason, noticed the fire in the casino and also immediately tried to sound the alarm. Unfortunately, none of the 5 devices to activate the fire alarm worked, which he tried out in quick succession. Fortunately, he eventually found a phone, so he was finally able to report the fire. By then, however, it was already too late, and due to changed official procedures, only 10 fire trucks were able to arrive at the scene instead of the usual 20. It is also possible that this fire and subsequent demolition shortly after the expo ended is related to the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. There are some contradictions with this fire. Officially, the cause of the Great Chicago Fire was that a cow knocked over a lantern. Evidence for this theory was never presented. Were the remains of the old world destroyed here in 2 phases? First with the city fire that claimed the lives of some 17,500 buildings, and later with the demolition of the expo site? Were there even 2 separate fires? Were there fires at all? Questions upon questions. Supposedly, by the mid-19th century, Chicago had rapidly developed from a small Indian settlement into the huge metropolis we know today. But again, there is no documentation of the logistics of city planning. Interestingly, Chicago appears with the name Chilaga on old maps. So was this possibly an important Old World city? And was Chilaga deliberately renamed Chicago to obscure its history? If we look at the White City of the Expo mentioned earlier from this point of view, the area could in fact have been a government district of Chilaga that was converted to a modern expo area. So, did the 27 million people who visited the exhibition actually witness the destruction of one of the last parts of Chilaga? The Statue of the Republic, which was on display at the Chicago World's Fair, holds in its right hand a sphere on which an eagle with outstretched wings is enthroned, while its left hand adorns a staff with a Phrygian cap, which was a symbol of the Scythians, or Tartars, and presumably symbolized freedom and justice. In the course of the Age of Enlightenment, the Phrygian cap continued to be used as a symbol of freedom. Significantly, in the same year that the Chicago Expo was being planned, the new University of Chicago was founded, considered one of the most important private American university foundations of the era, generously supported by oil magnate John D. Rockefeller. And this very university bears in its coat of arms a griffin burning in fire, in which one could also recognize a symbol for the destruction of the Old World Empire. Some symbols, such as the double-headed eagle, the mythological griffin, the quadriga, i.e. four-horse, and the lion, we encounter again and again in the context of the Old World. Louisiana Purchase Exposition, St. Louis, USA, 1904. The Louisiana Purchase Expo, also known as the St. Louis World's Fair, was twice the size of the Chicago Expo and consisted of more than 1,500 buildings connected by roads and trails over a length of 121 kilometers. Only 2 buildings are said to have been solidly and permanently built, while all the others were demolished immediately after the expo. The whole thing was financed with more than $15 million at a time when St. Louis was in economic distress and its citizens were plagued by corruption, poverty, and dis-ease. The planning of the expo itself was also overshadowed by several cases of corruption. The first $5 million was provided by the city of St. Louis through the sale of municipal bonds. Another $5 million was raised through private donations from interested citizens and businesses throughout Missouri. The final $5 million came in the form of funds that were part of a congressional appropriation bill passed in late May 1900. In the end, the expo made a loss of $8.5 million, the equivalent of more than $250 million today. But if there was no financial incentive for the expo, what was the point? On the official expo website, we can read,
As the majority of the pavilions were built to be temporary, few legacies remain today. However, the Palace of Visual Arts still stands in its place and now serves as the Museum of Arts of St. Louis, one of the largest art museums in the United States.
The Missouri Exposition Pavilion, as the largest and most impressive building, was supposed to have been preserved for future generations, but it burned down barely 2 weeks before the end of the expo on November 18, 1904. As it was said, a reconstruction was therefore renounced. The site was also home to the world's largest organ and dome at the time.
The Festival Hall was another staple of the expo in St. Louis, featuring the largest dome in the world at the time. The building featured 3 water cascades draining into the Fountain of Liberty, which was adorned with statues personifying liberty, the largest of the statues, genius, and inspiration.
The approximately 4.9 square kilometer fairgrounds used for the World's Fair were located on what is now Forest Park and the Washington University campus, and it was the largest fair area in the world at that time. The total construction time was less than 3 years, and the Palace of Agriculture alone took up a staggering 81,000 square feet. It was said to be impossible to get even a glimpse of everything in less than a week. More than 19 million people are said to have visited the expo at that time. Remarkable, considering that St. Louis had only 500,000 residents back then. One observer of the World's Fair noted, George Kessler was the architect of the expo. But, oddly enough, there is a popular myth that says Frederick Law Olmsted actually designed the fairgrounds. There are hundreds of photos of the alleged construction process of the expo. And of course, various buildings were indeed newly constructed for the expo, especially the trashy structures that lack the classicist aesthetic. Existing structures also appear to have been outfitted with obviously primitive, tasteless decorations. However, the photographs purporting to show the construction process of the grand, impressive classical exhibition palaces may as well have been made during the demolition. Historian Dr. Robert Archibald says about the St. Louis Expo,
The fair planners had a contractual obligation to demolish the fairgrounds and return Forest Park to sort of a predetermined lands. They were legally obligated to do that. The problem on the Pike was they were all concessionaires and everything they had set up was all theirs. They couldn't sell it for anything. The costs of demolition were greater than the value of what there was to salvage.
This defies all economic logic and only makes sense if there was a secret agreement between the city and the industrialists. They had to erase all traces of the expo against any natural economic impulse of these entrepreneurs who always strive to maximize profits. The story we are being served up is almost perfect, but on closer inspection, we see that it has been reversed. Thus, pictures of the demolition were probably simply declared to be shots of the construction process, and the photos of the empty site after the demolition are now sold to us as photos taken before the construction. The digitized archive photos are, in all likelihood, a mixture of authentic, real new buildings, demolition photos, and manipulated photo collages. Panama, California Exposition, San Diego, USA, 1915. President Theodore Roosevelt speaking to visitors outside the exposition's Organ Pavilion on July 27, 1915, said,
It is so beautiful that I wish to make an earnest plea. I hope that not only will you keep these buildings running for another year, but you will keep these buildings of rare, phenomenal taste and beauty permanently.
The official guidebook accompanying the San Diego Expo lists the permanent and temporary buildings and describes that the temporary buildings will be demolished soon after the Expo. But most of these buildings, the official narrative says, were nonetheless in use for more than 50 years and were reused during the second San Diego Expo in 1935. How is it possible that these buildings easily lasted another 50 years or even longer if they were only built with limited durability only for the period of the first Expo? Officially, the remaining structures were rebuilt in the second half of the 20th century and are now known as the Casa del Prado, Balboa Park in modern San Diego. To summarize, temporary buildings are erected that are supposed to last only a few years, but they easily last more than 50 years and continue to be used until they suddenly fall into disrepair. But because they're so beautiful, they are rebuilt with more massive materials in the 1960s and 1990s. In the official guidebook of the exhibition, we can read that many visitors of past exhibitions were disappointed because most of the buildings were immediately demolished again. The planners of the Panama, California Expo in San Diego therefore note,
Nothing connected with past fairs has been so depressing as the destruction of the buildings after the exposition was over. This will not be the case when, on January 1st, 1916, the Panama, California Exposition is closed, for all the structures except the concession buildings along the isthmus have been built to stay. In the Great West Quadrangle, for example, all the structures are built entirely of steel and concrete and will be used in decades to come for housing the museum exhibits, which have been donated to the exposition.
It is not known whether this pamphlet was printed after Theodore Roosevelt had advocated for the preservation of the buildings. However, the quote from Roosevelt would have been extremely odd if it had already been officially known at the time that most of the buildings were to be preserved. One can assume that the planners began to sweat a bit after prominent protests were directed against the demolition plans, and therefore they had to change their narrative somewhat. Further, we learn that the subsequent expo, the California Pacific International Exposition, on the same grounds in 1935 was so popular that some buildings were converted from temporary to permanent. Many buildings or reconstructed versions are still in use today and are used by several museums and theaters in Balboa Park. The Casa del Prado was supposedly demolished in the 60s and rebuilt true to the original in permanent form. The House of Charm and the House of Hospitality were even only rebuilt in the 1990s. And this despite the fact that the official expo booklet stated that the temporary buildings were designed for a maximum lifespan of 30 years. Here we encounter the usual story again. If some buildings of the expos were not demolished, they were supposedly demolished and then rebuilt in a permanent way, although enormous sums were already invested in the renovation process of the supposedly temporary buildings before their demolition. Ironically, in the early 1960s, the destruction of some buildings and their replacement with modern architecturally inappropriate structures caused an uproar in San Diego. In 1967, some citizens formed a Committee of 100 to protect and preserve the historic structures. The movement was a success, and the historic buildings were preserved or rebuilt. Isn't it amazing the persistence with which certain forces seem to push to erase the old architecture? We are beginning to see a pattern. The public was shocked every time the exhibition buildings disappeared again, and the planners couldn't move fast enough to destroy everything again if possible. Another temporary building, the Electrical Building, burned down in 1978, allegedly by arson of 2 youths. According to the official story, it was then rebuilt true to the original in a permanent form. The old Globe Theater, originally built for the Expo 1935, also burned down in 1978 as a result of arson. Quote from Wikipedia.
Bertram Goodhue, master architect of the 1915-16 Panama, California Exposition, had urged that the temporary buildings on Balboa Park's main avenue, El Prado, be torn down. But the citizens of San Diego spurned this advice. With the help of federal government money, they patched up the temporary palaces in 1922 and 1933. This allowed most of the original buildings to be reused for the second exhibition in 1935.
Specifically about the House of Charm, which now houses the Art Museum, we read,
Although there were ongoing doubts about the soundness of the building, which was not intended to be a permanent structure, it continued to be used during the 1940s and 1950s. Tenants included the Model Railroad Museum, the San Diego Hall of Champions, and the San Diego Men's Art Club, forerunner of the San Diego Art Institute. In 1978, the building was condemned as unsafe and was temporarily evacuated, but the San Diego Art Institute moved back in after sprinklers were installed.
So sprinklers were all that was necessary to reclassify this temporary building as safe. That is, it was only a matter of fire safety, not that the building was structurally unsafe. Politician George W. Marston wrote in 1922,
You may prove what you will in facts and figures about the shaky old buildings. The only answer is, they shall not pass. Somehow, without knowing how to explain it, we are instinctively, subconsciously, incurably in love with them and will not give them up. It's the grand emotion and is founded, I think, on something real and vital.
Let's summarize. Most of the temporary buildings in San Diego were supposed to be torn down and only meant to last for a short time, 30 years at most, but officially stood well into the 1990s. Then they got demolished and rebuilt as perfect copies in a permanent way. The organizers behind the expo always wanted to get rid of the buildings, but there was public resistance so enormous that many got renovated or rebuilt instead. In principle, permanent buildings are also affected by the need for regular renovation. For example, many cathedrals, such as Cologne Cathedral or Freiburg Cathedral in Germany, have been in a permanent state of renovation during their entire official existence. This is what the San Diego Pavilion looked like in the 70s, which was officially one of these permanent buildings. It had to be restored at a cost of about $500,000. Expensive renovations are therefore not a reliable indication that a building was not originally constructed in a permanent form. Liège Internationale, World's Fair in Liège, Belgium, 1905. About the exposition, we can read the following interesting remark.
Note, it is sometimes difficult to tell whether certain nations actually participated in a significant way. Newspaper reports, as well as the official documents or secondary sources, may indicate participation when actual participation did not occur or occurred minimally. Some nations had unofficial exhibits. It is unknown whether some above that are listed as official actually were. Take the above as a guide, not gospel. Various sources differ on who exhibited.
The documentation of the expos seems to have been a bit poor and contradictory in general. The only thing that can be said with absolute certainty is that of all the exhibition buildings in Liège, only the Palace of Fine Arts has been preserved and can still be admired in all its splendor today. Note that the other buildings in the exhibition shown here are little different from the Palace of Fine Arts. Most of the buildings appear to have been similarly massive in construction and probably would not have needed to be demolished. Great Industrial Exposition of Berlin, Germany, 1896. The Berlin Trade Exhibition of 1896 was the first exhibition to feature baby incubators. Incubators displaying premature babies were to be found at most expos from then on. What does this say about a society that displays preemies in such a cold and inhumane way? Were these incubators as much a part of an agenda as the orphan trains? In any case, uprooting children seems to be the best way to traumatize a society and completely disconnect it from its history. In particular, the former colonies, Australia, New Zealand, and America, were largely populated by orphans and criminals. For example, the first European settlers of Australia in 1787 are said to have been 700 convicts, and within the next 80 years, more than 160,000 prisoners were shipped to Australia to repopulate the country. A report by the UK's House of Commons Child Migrants Trust also states that an estimated 150,000 children were affected by forced relocations to the colonies over a period of 350 years, and that this process did not stop until the late 1960s. Whether all of these children were orphans or had living parents cannot be conclusively determined. However, what is known about the shipped children of the 20th century is that many did indeed come from poor, broken homes, and their parents were still alive, although they were usually told otherwise. But back to the trade exhibition. The Berlin area of 900,000 square miles was even larger than that of previous World's Fairs in America and elsewhere. The old Berlin area alone, which was supposedly a detailed replica of late medieval Berlin, consisted of 120 elaborately designed buildings. Among them were 2 city gates, the Zwinger, the market square, the town hall, the hospital, and a theater of breathtaking size. Photos of this area show massive and seemingly ancient stone buildings. Surprisingly, not a single photo exists of the Alt Berlin Theater, which was demolished in 1897. Neither of the construction, the finished building, nor the demolition. And at that time, it was supposed to have been the largest theater in Berlin. It was closed already during the course of the Berlin Trade Exhibition, and the demolition process began shortly after. A website dedicated to the architect Bernhard Siering informs us,
Facts and details about this theater have unfortunately been hard to find, and we are pinning our hopes on further searches for old postcards or private photographs. In addition, there was a ban on publication and advertising, and the fact that the actual visitors to the fair probably did not have the time and leisure for a theater performance lasting several hours. After all, it was a trade exhibition. All this had a serious effect on the number of visitors and led to bankruptcy and ultimately to the demolition of the 200,000 mark building, which was not winterproof, while the fair was still in progress.
The ban on advertising is also mysterious. Why was the theater not allowed to advertise? Well, perhaps they wanted the theater to disappear as quickly as possible and without much fuss. Even the marketplace in Alt Berlin, supposedly built of temporary materials, hardly looks a cheap new construction. The roof tiles look weathered, the stones massive and ancient. On the walls of the houses, we also see signs of age. Spandaustrasse in Alt Berlin shows the same picture. Weathered, massive buildings. Nothing in this photo indicates that even a single building here was temporary. The filthy house walls alone speak volumes. Here it seems that a historic part of the city, like all the buildings of the 1896 Trade and Industrial Exhibition, has simply been razed to the ground and all records of its existence destroyed. Incidentally, Germany did not play a major role at the World Exhibitions. It was not until the foundation of the German Empire in 1871 that the
German contribution to the exhibition of commercial, industrial, technical, and artistic products assumed more significant proportions.
It can be assumed that before 1871, there was no central authority through which the cabal could have exerted influence on the Germans. In the wake of the founding of the Reich, however, a spectacular process of high industrialization occurred. Within a few decades, the empire made up for and even surpassed the deficits in comparison to other European countries. When the empire also overtook Britain, it was decided by the cabal, for whatever reason, to neutralize Germany geopolitically and catapult it into cultural irrelevance with 2 world wars. In the period between 1871 and 1914, however, Germany was transformed for the first time from an agricultural to an industrial country, with drastic consequences for the reality of life for many Germans. Due to the massive immigration into the empire between 1871 and 1914, from 40 to over 60 million inhabitants, it can be assumed that misery and poverty were rampant in the German cultural area before the founding of the empire, and that in the course of industrialization, many people could once again hope for prosperity. But what role did the newly founded empire play in the destruction of the German spirit? Did people still live in the consciousness of the Old Reich, as the Holy Roman Empire of German Nations was also called, which, according to official historiography, lasted until 1806? The last Prussian king, Wilhelm II, put it this way:
It is our duty to educate the youth so that they become young Germans and not young Greeks or Romans.
Thus, national identity formation and patriotic education became the flagship of Prussian education. How is it that Germans came to think of themselves as Romans? Was German identity first thrust upon us to separate us from our Nordic Germanic brothers and sisters outside the imperial borders? At the very least, this focus on national identity formation and the architecture that exists in Germany suggests that there was once a unified culture in Europe, and that our past was rooted in an advanced culture that is commonly described as Greco-Roman, but had nothing at all to do with Rome or Greece, because Rome was everywhere as part of a Nordic culture. Industrial and Commercial Exhibition, Dusseldorf, Germany, 1902. The trade exhibition in Dusseldorf followed on from the Rhenish-Westphalian Industry and Trade Exhibition of 1880. The latter was held in a huge, impressive neoclassical hall in the Zoological Garden. The pictures that have survived show a rather massive-looking building, but we learn
The building material was mostly wood. The roofs were made of reddish-brown roofing felt, and draperies, i.e. decoratively arranged materials, were made of carefully stenciled burlap.
more than 100 supposedly temporary halls were completely demolished after the exhibition. We cannot verify any of this at the current time. Detailed graphics of the exhibition do not even seem to exist. A different location was chosen for the Dusseldorf Trade Exhibition in 1902, which would naturally be the obvious choice if the aim was to destroy as much architecture as possible. Thus, it has been handed down that more than 150 exhibition buildings were erected on the banks of the Rhine, including the main building known as the Kunstpalast. This domed building alone contained 14 huge halls. The official version says,
The mostly temporary exhibition architectures combined new industrial and craft production methods with the forms of Art Nouveau, sometimes also with the forms of Neo-Baroque or eclectic mixtures of styles.
Although at the time there seemed to be no desire to spend either time or money on permanent buildings, the operators did show astonishing endurance when it came to the subsequent relocation of some of the exhibition halls. One hall was transported to Bochum, one to Cologne, and a third even to Mexico City and rebuilt. However, the largest halls of the 1902 exhibition were designed to stand the test of time. The exhibition building of the State Railroad, for example, was similarly impressive as the Art Palace, and the Art Palace itself was never demolished, only built over and integrated, which raises some questions given the ugliness of the modern building. The exhibition hall of the Bochum Association, which now stands as the Century Hall in Bochum, also mysteriously looks completely different nowadays. Saxon-Thuringian Industrial and Commercial Exhibition, Leipzig, Germany, 1897. It is also known from the Leipzig exhibition that all the buildings were demolished afterwards. In the end, only an empty area remained, today part of the Clara Zetkin Park, formerly called König Albert Park. The fact that two hills were built from the rubble of the demolished buildings, which still adorn the park today, seems a little macabre. The Leipzig exhibition, like the Berlin exhibition, included a replica of the old town. And of course, as with other expos, these were supposed to have been only cheap cardboard buildings. But in an article of that time, we find a hint that the reality must have looked a bit more complicated. So we can read in the newspaper The Bauer from 1897.
We first prefer the excursion to the village situated at Forest and River, whose houses partly consist of real buildings, which were demolished at their location and were rebuilt here, and partly copies as lifelike replicas.
It is astonishing to see how this aspect is completely ignored in the generally discoverable sources. Some of the buildings were thus, according to the narrative of the time, presumably genuine old buildings from German cities, but were demolished and rebuilt for the exhibition. Whether this process can be said to have been an economically rational decision remains to be seen. But which house owner actually agreed to make his houses available for demolition, only to stand idly by and watch the final demolition after the end of the exhibition? Even the description of the main building does not exactly give the reader the impression of a cheap building.
When we enter the exhibition park through the main gate, flanked by 2 high obelisks, the area of which covers 400,000 square meters, we are met by a surprisingly beautiful sight. In front of us stretches an extremely charming landscape. In the midst of magnificent plantings lies a sparkling pond, animated by swans and framed by delicate statues, and in the background, the impressive main building is visible, greeting us like a white castle. This is our destination. We walk along the wide Linden Avenue leading around the water, which runs through magnificent gardens in which kiosks and temples are picturesquely scattered, and reach the mighty main building via the Flood Canal Bridge, which is decorated with statues representing Saxony and Thuringia, industry and trade. The building itself, in Renaissance style, occupies an area of more than 40,000 square meters, including the machine hall, and is adorned with a number of small towers. In front of the entrance are the pillared figures of the cities of Dresden, Leipzig, and Chemnitz.
Even the electricity stations, which were supposedly built in Dusseldorf as well as in Leipzig, especially for the expos, must have been so temporary that they suddenly collapsed only a few days after the end of the exhibitions. In any case, they were completely removed as quickly as possible. The same fate befell the electric circular track of the expo. And it's almost surprising that it was usable at all. Well, maybe the tracks and wagons made of temporary materials were unusable already a few days after the expo and started to magically disintegrate. What if the power plants of the expos functioned completely differently than we are told today? Are we possibly dealing with a completely different form of energy supply that was still in use at various exhibitions? In any case, the speed at which the supposed power stations were removed is suspicious. This also befell other buildings and power plants that aren't associated with the expos. For example, the tower of the Dresden District Heating Power Station, which in itself was an architectural feast for the eyes, and whose facade was made of Elbe sandstone in order, as it was said, to pick up on the harmony of the cityscape. Why it was allowed to remain standing for only 34 years after its final completion in 1901 will probably never be conclusively explained. Officially, it was no longer needed, but it seems strange why it was not even considered worth preserving in order to preserve the cityscape as a whole, after no effort had originally been spared in terms of appearance. Just compare today's industrial facilities with this extraordinary beauty. By the way, the demolition of the rest of the building did not take place until 1978, so it seems that the removal of the tower was particularly urgent. Exposition Universelle, Paris, France, 1889. Most of the buildings of the Paris Expo of 1889 were located on military or municipal land and were demolished shortly after the end of the exhibition. Only the Eiffel Tower remained, although 11 years later another exhibition was held, and it seems completely nonsensical to rebuild everything again for this. The second exhibition in 1900 was also strongly criticized as it had not been as impressive as its predecessor. This may have been primarily due to the fact that most of the old structures had already been razed to the ground and the new buildings looked primitive in comparison. It was of great importance for the cabal to gain control of Paris. The French Revolution, or the Age of Revolutions, followed destruction of the old world. They concluded the events that today's historians refer to as the General Crisis. The General Crisis is a term that describes the period of widespread conflict that destabilized Europe from the early 17th century to the early 18th century. These two terms, General Crisis, Age of Revolutions, disguise the destruction of the old world as unrelated events. With the European revolutions began the age of modern pseudo-democratic states. The influence of the secret lodges, especially Freemasonry, on the French Revolution is well known. Propaganda was used to incite the masses against the king, and the ancient regime was deposed. It is against this background that the 1889 exhibition should be viewed, as it marks the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. A special feature of the Paris exhibitions is the Eiffel Tower. Unlike many other buildings, in this case the construction is documented in a comprehensible way. This steel building was therefore indeed built anew for the exposition, another indication of which is that the architectural style of the tower differs considerably from the ancient Greco-Roman style buildings. The Eiffel Tower, while impressive in size, is not an aesthetic structure, such as the Palais du Trocadero. Does the Eiffel Tower, then, represent the cabal's achieved control over this part of the old world? Looking at famous pictures of the exhibition, the Eiffel Tower looks like a gigantic juggernaut, sterile and functional, towering over the old sublime architecture, symbolizing the triumph of modernity over the old world.
How long do you generally sleep each night, Mr. Fusi?
8 hours?
441,504,000 seconds of time you just throw away.
The robber barons of the Gilded Age. Everywhere in the Western world there were the robber barons, industrialists who were directly or indirectly controlled by secret societies, and who could accumulate enormous amounts of money as long as they did what was asked of them. This period has different names. In the United States it is known as the Gilded Age, and in Germany as the Gründerzeit, from about the 1860s to the early 1900s. However, this golden age came to an abrupt end with the First World War. In any case, industrialists seem to have been the stewards of the new technologies, and most of today's major entrepreneurs were shaped in one way or another by the transfer of technology from the world's fairs. Emil Rathenau, for example, founded AEG in response to the technical achievements he observed at the world's fairs in Paris, Vienna, and Philadelphia. Some interesting aspects emerge from the analysis of the industrial families. They were, and still are, obsessed with art and other artifacts from the pre-industrial era. The early industrialists literally hoarded entire houses full of sculptures and paintings, as if it was just a matter of making as many remnants of the old world disappear as possible. It remains to be said that thousands of works of art and sculptures were presented at the world exhibitions, which have since largely disappeared. They lived in the most impressive neoclassical buildings, basically palaces, that existed at the time. Mysteriously, however, they had many of these buildings demolished very quickly, perhaps a little too quickly considering the construction costs. One of the most impressive examples is certainly the Astor House in Manhattan. Among the largest in the entire city, It was supposedly completed in 1896 and demolished already in 1926. And is this photo of the alleged construction of the Villa Hugel of the German industrialist family Krupp really a new building, or rather a renovation project? In any case, it is very likely that all these buildings were already standing and were simply taken by the new power elite. Possibly, then, the term robber barons meant precisely people who had literally stolen their property. Purpose of the World Exhibitions. If it is true that many of the buildings at the World's Fairs already existed and were only renovated, then the destruction of these buildings is one of the largest cover-ups in recent history. Also, this would be further proof that pretty much all countries were already controlled by the cabal 100 years ago, and modern politics was intended from the beginning as a means to infiltrate and control cultures. The systematic destruction of knowledge and the theft of cultural goods and property by the church continued seamlessly with the advent of more contemporary nation-states. With the help of a central monetary system imposed on us, state-legitimized robbery is still the main cause of the transfer of wealth and possessions into the hands of a few. The misappropriation of majestic old-world building sites by the new post-colonial power elite happened at the same time as other events that all seem to be connected. Thus, from the mid-19th century onwards, not only were World's Fairs held in oversized and far too expensive buildings that were completely inappropriate for them, but at the same time the first psychiatric hospitals, insane asylums, were being built. Just like the World Exhibitions, these psychiatric hospitals were architecturally unsuitable for the defined purpose. Architecture always reflects the consciousness of the builders and is defined by its purpose. However, we would expect industrialists to build simply and economically, to use steel and concrete, and by no means to demolish their buildings immediately, but to try to generate income from land and buildings for as long as possible. But we see just the opposite. The buildings at the World's Fairs are detailed, ornate, aesthetic, and far too large and expensive for their purpose. They represent something completely different from the world we know. They represent ancient Rome, the classical ideals of the beautiful, the true, the good, the pursuit of the divine and perfection. The World's Fairs connect two completely opposite eras or cultures that should have no points of contact at all. The world of the industrial robber barons and an old world that we can no longer remember, but in which the economic principles we know played no great role. Of course, some of the buildings at the fairgrounds were indeed cheaply constructed and temporary in nature. For example, in this photo of the Louisiana Purchase Expo, you can clearly see that some of the plaster is peeling off and the interior, consisting of wood, is exposed. Another example of a temporary structure is the Porte Monumentale at the World's Fair in Paris. This monumental gate has been called tasteless and considered by some critics to be the ugliest of all the Paris exhibits. Years after the St. Louis Expo, one of the architects, Louis Sullivan, wrote in The Autobiography of an Idea,
Meanwhile, the virus of the World's Fair, after a period of incubation in the architectural profession and in the population at large, especially the influential, began to show unmistakable signs of the nature of the contagion. There came a violent outbreak of the classic and the Renaissance in the American East, which slowly spread westward, contaminating all that it touched, both at its source and outward. The selling campaign of the bogus antique was remarkably well managed through skillful publicity and propaganda by those who were first to see its commercial possibilities. The market was ripe, made so through the ebitude of the populace, big businessmen, and eminent educators alike. By the time the market had been saturated, all sense of reality was gone. In its place had come deep-seated illusions, hallucinations, the blanketing of the brain. Thus, architecture died in the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Sullivan aptly describes here the poisoned rebirth of pseudo-classicism in the 20th century, the attempt to imitate the old structures without having understood the architectural principles. We always see two fundamentally different types of architecture in the photos of the expos. On the one hand, the massive classicist buildings with uniform and harmonious proportions of the golden ratio. They do not differ in the slightest from the real European Renaissance buildings, because in fact they come from the same era. On the other hand, we see cheap-looking, actually temporary buildings made of plaster and other cheap materials, which do not originate from any known historical epoch, and which were obviously built with the intention of tearing them down again as quickly as possible. The following photo shows very well how little time there was to renovate the areas back then. The buildings in the background have been renovated and repainted, while the two small houses in the foreground are still very yellowed and show their true age. Many temporary structures were erected around the old buildings for the expos, e.g., cheap pavilions, walls made of plaster, and imitations of famous buildings. But after the expos, not only the temporary, but also the old buildings were demolished. Did the World's Fairs perhaps serve, among other things, as an instrument to give people a national identity after the unified culture had collapsed? The separation into nations seems artificial. The Slavs, for example, seem just like the Germans of Nordic origin and thus part of the same people. The term Slav originated from the pejorative term sklavy, was put into the world by the Vatican and stood for the pagan tribes of Europe who did not want to submit to the monotheistic power apparatuses. After the successful infiltration of the German cultural area, only the pagan Eastern Europeans were referred to as Slavs. In fact, most of the nations we know today were not founded until after 1850. Modern Egypt, for example, only in 1953, after the British conquest. Illyria, the home of the Illyrians, became the Balkans after annexation by France. Free Tartary became Uzbekistan. Persia became Iran in 1935. The Ottoman Empire became Turkey in 1923, and so on. The old words have a meaning. Our whole past resonates in them. When these words are spoken, that alone establishes a real connection with the past. By losing these words, we also lose that connection, and with it, the connection to our ancestors. Meanwhile, our world is divided into various soulless administrative units, controlled by a small secret elite. It was at the expos that people first came into contact with the new technologies. Telephones, railways, electric light, i.e. the light bulb, wireless communications, incubators, cars, photography, films. In addition, the supposed realities of life in the colonies were also frequently depicted. Africa, South America, etc. The creation of the patent system played an important role in building the monopolies, because only with patents it was possible to own knowledge, and thus technologies, and thus control people. The foundation of the world we live in today was laid then during the time of the World Expositions. The technological knowledge of the old world was selected. One part of the knowledge was kept secret, the other part was presented to the public. One of the most important criteria in this decision-making process was whether a technology could be controlled by a central authority. Any form of free energy must have been very dangerous to the forces that controlled the robber barons of the industrial age from the shadows. It is important to understand that these industrialists had not earned their wealth themselves. They were born into elite families and chosen to play a predetermined role. Hierarchy and power. Only since the dawn of the 20th century has the attitude prevailed that one must take something from others in order to be able to have something oneself. Competition took the place of cooperation. These two opposing worldviews, cooperation and competition, can be visualized as follows, with a circle and a pyramid. The competition system is pyramidally organized. It involves an authoritarian chain of command that requires absolute obedience. At the level of the intelligence services, this system is represented by the need-to-know principle. Competitive thinking can only arise in a hierarchically organized society. In this society, energy flows from the masses at the base upward to the top of the pyramid, where it may even be absorbed or consumed by non-earthly entities. At the top seems to be what is named in mythological, religious, and esoteric lore as Satan, Antichrist, evil, or the demiurge. At the base of the pyramid are people who feel powerless, basically slaves. Success in this system is defined by making it to the top. This always implies that on the way up you oppress other people, take something away from them. The further up you go, the more powerful you feel. Energy is represented or symbolized by money in this system. The money system was built in such a way that, in the sense of the pyramidal system, it gradually directs people's life energy to the top of the pyramid. We can assume that this is also where the true reason for the existence of the fiat money system is hidden. To rob people of their life energy.
Wer bist du?
Mein Name ist Momo.
We already encounter the connection between parasitic paranormal beings, the monetary system, and the oppression of humanity in the work Momo by the author Michael Ende. Men in gray, called time thieves, steal people's time. These interdimensional parasites convince the adults that they can save time by depositing it in a time savings bank. The adults believe the promises of the men in gray. In reality, the more they save, the less time they have. The time they save is lost to them. Life gradually becomes sterile and bleak. Buildings become standardized and all look the same, just like clothes. No one lives in the present anymore. No one has time for each other. And life becomes hectic. Only the children recognize the cold, vicious nature of the gray men, as they are still in touch with their own aliveness. The adults fall prey to the idea of having to save time, and so their lives become increasingly bleak and gray. But the gray men are gradually able to cast their spell over the children as well. Only Momo can resist the cold, psychopathic power of the gray men. Outside of space and time, she defeats the men in gray, frees the stolen time, and gives people back their vitality and the love in their hearts. It's amazing, by the way, that in the novel, Momo lives in an old, decaying Roman amphitheater surrounded by dreary, modern, new buildings. Momo represents the connection to the old world. She represents life. When Momo defeats the men in gray, the last one says with relief,
Es ist gut, dass alles vorbei.
Michael Ende realized that evil has no existence of its own. It is only a shadow, a black hole, the absence of something. Evil can only exist as long as there are people running away from themselves and their own aliveness. The parasites are our creation. The destruction of the parasites is the triumph of man over his own contradictory nature and his dark side. Power and powerlessness are in truth only two sides of the same coin. And also, in karmic terms, everything has its price. Every experience of power is always based on a corresponding experience of powerlessness, even if these experiences are separated on a temporal level. A good metaphor for the pyramidal system is a black hole that absorbs all light, consumes everything, and releases nothing. It is a one-way street. That's why secret societies exist in the first place. In a pyramidal system, the relevant decisions have to be made in the shadows, and no one is allowed to know the people making the decisions. The system is like a hydra, and we can only see some of their heads. Evil is always absorbing, consuming, calculating, inward-looking. It closes itself to life, to exchange, and to truth. Possibly in the old world, on the other hand, people were integrated into a cycle. Everything was cyclical and in balance. People knew that they had nothing to lose by giving to others. In these communities, people lived for each other. On an energetic level, energy flowed freely between them without flowing outward. In these small, healthy communities, there were no authoritarian hierarchies, no chains of command, no parasitic forces. Authorities evolved naturally, and people with natural authority were keen not to abuse their power, as this would have resulted in expulsion from the communities. The system, built on cooperation, includes multiple rings running concentrically outward. In the center is the heart, the wisest, most intelligent, most capable people in the community. Unlike the pyramidal system, these people do not hide, for they need not fear transparency. Even architecture reflected this concentric system. For example, in the round city of Baghdad, or Atlantis, which was supposedly built in rings. From the center or heart of the city, life moves outward in rings. The city wall separates the city from the outside world, creating a self-contained living system. Goodness is outwardly radiant, giving, without ulterior motive and without expecting anything in return. It is its own cause, its own source, and has enormous radiance.
So, we're going to pull out some of the elements of this story. Now, we expect this to be a hero journey, and indeed it is, in a very obvious and overt way. Let's go over basic story architecture first. So when you first start writing and filmmaking, you have a linear perspective in that sense. Pretty soon you realize that both the beginning and the ending are the same, which is why we demonstrate story structure via a loop.
These are 7 basic plots.
The hero's journey. Julius Evola, revolt against the modern world.
With the First World War, the Russian Revolution, and the Second World War, it can finally be said that the decisive events are rushing towards the end times. In 1914, the imperial court still represented a remnant of feudal and aristocratic Europe in the Western world. The World War of 1914-1918, like few other wars in history, shows all the signs of a clash, not between states and nations, but between ideologies of different castes. This resulted directly and intentionally in the destruction of Imperial Germany and Catholic Austria, and indirectly in the collapse of the Tsarist Empire and the Communist Revolution. Furthermore, this resulted in such a chaotic and contradictory political economic situation in Europe that all the preconditions for a new world conflict were in place.
In his 1922 poem, The Wasteland, the poet T.S. Eliot describes the atmosphere of Western society after World War I. He writes about a collective loss of meaning in human existence. The First World War and what is sold to us as the Spanish flu catapulted Europe into godless modernity, completing the development that had been initiated earlier with the World's Fairs and the Industrial Revolution. Man, cut off from his roots, became a cog in a great wheel. Life was replaced with mere functioning. There isn't a more hopeless poem than Eliot's. Eliot processed the fate of a lost generation, of people who were only running away from themselves. Civilization was riddled with materialism, hedonism, and atheism. Behind this, for him, was the godlessness of modernity, the nihilism that opened up like a yawning abyss in front of humanity. This modern nihilism and materialism shows itself ideologically above all in the theory of evolution and heliocentrism. Traditional man lived in a world that represented just the opposite. Instead of a slow evolution from animal to human, with no higher meaning in a cold and hostile universe, we were placed by a creator in a perfect world, where we are the center of reality and where everything we experience and do has deep meaning. Turning away from this view, rooted in tradition and dissolving the old order, is the most important goal of the occult secret societies.
According to the traditional view, the material world contains only effects. Nothing takes place in this world that did not first originate in a world invisible to us. The ancient world elevated man to God, endeavored to free him from the material passions, to transcend him with free elevation in thought as well as in action. The Semitic world not only deprived the human creature of the divine, but finally reduced God to a human form.
Julius Evola, Revolt Against the Modern World. The 1925 novel The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald is another example of post-war literature that reflects this loss of meaning. Post-war society in The Great Gatsby is characterized by materialism, consumerism, and competitiveness. Behind this is a sense of isolation. People had been cut off from their natural communities by the upheavals of modernity, and without these communities they lost not only their connection to their past, but also to their fellow human beings. When a human being lives only for himself, life is only worth something if you have more than others. In contrast to this destructive processing of what had happened was J.R.R. Tolkien, who was also active at the time of the First World War. He grasped the complete dimension of the problem. He could only process this in myths and pictures because it is not consciously accessible to us. While Eliot and Fitzgerald are now known only to a small academic elite, Tolkien created a resonance among the masses that still seems unbroken. Unlike Eliot, he grasped the big picture and also recognized that good triumphs in the end. Unlike the alienated academics of the 20th century, he restored hope and brought back meaning to humanity. Mythologist and author Joseph Campbell describes in his epic work, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, that there is the same basic structure in the most famous stories and myths of mankind. The universal hero's journey. In the Jungian sense, it is one of the most important archetypes. It is the monomyth, the essence of all myths and stories.
You enter the forest in the darkest place, where there is no path. Where there is a way or path, it is someone else's path. Then you're not on your own path. The hero's journey is about the courage to seek the deep, the image of creative rebirth, the eternal cycle of change within us, the uncanny discovery that the seeker is himself the mystery he seeks to know. The hero's journey is a symbol that, in the original sense of the word, connects two ideas far apart: the spiritual quest of the elders with the modern search for identity, which is always the same one, shape-shifting yet wonderfully constant story.
Who's the hero? You and me. Anyone who sets out on the quest. The hero's journey essentially consists of 3 sections: separation, initiation, and return. This myth is encoded, for example, in the biblical story of the prodigal son. The son leaves his father, separation, experiences initiation, he seeks happiness in the material external world, squanders money and becomes impoverished, then he repents of his sins and finds God. And return, reunion with family. The hero's journey is a journey out of a morally corrupt, stuck life into one's own darkness, a confrontation with one's own shadows. This confrontation leads to an initiation and eventual integration of what has been experienced. In this way, the hero brings a piece of divinity and vitality into the material, in the biblical sense satanic, world.
For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, against principalities, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Why do you still do it? Why are you still out there?
Well, it goes back to the destiny thing. And I made a bargain with it, a long time ago, and I'm holding up my hand.
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And this earth, and then in the world we can't see.
These dark rulers work directly through people, as Bob Dylan has made unmistakably clear. Those who have power, fame, and influence in this world in these times pay a high price. A price that goes beyond this world. In the beginning, there is always a decision. In terms of our history, humanity is going through this very heroic journey. We are collectively in the second part, the initiation process, the point where the night is darkest, the dark night of the soul, the point where we are confronted with darkness, with evil. At the end of this process, there is a renewal, a reconnection with one's own history, destiny, and being, and ultimately with God. According to Zoroastrianism, the purpose of our existence on Earth is to enable the dark part of human nature to live out its darkness. This enables humanity to overcome its own darkness. In this way, entering the karmic cycles of the Earth can be understood as the conscious decision to break away from evil. In Zoroastrianism, the world was created only to finally eradicate evil, Ahriman, comparable to Satan in the Bible. According to this, God set a trap for his adversary by creating the earth. Evil is now trapped in earthly existence and inevitably exposed to the process of becoming conscious, and is thereby finally destroyed at the end of the earthly ages. In order to support this process, it is necessary that enough of us make a conscious decision for truth and against the lies of this world.
For every shadow, no matter how deep, is threatened by morning light. By morning light.
All right, folks, we are back. That was part 3 called Stolen History, The Mysteries of the World's Fair. Oh, sorry about that. I set a timer for when the segment was done playing. I forgot to exit out of it. Anyways, Dottie, would you like to come on and get started and show our viewers what you found?
Give me 1 second. I'm trying to, because I want you to see another video that I watched that I found very interesting. That kind of like led me down this little path that I've been on.
Okay.
So I'm
gonna screen share the map that I found regarding the Louisiana Purchase exhibit from the St. Louis 1904 World's Fair for you to use. I don't know if you probably have this one or not, but I'm gonna send it to you in the Zoom chat here in a minute.
Okay. Do you have it up?
Hold on 1 second. I'm looking for it. Here we go. Let me send it to you in the Zoom chat, and then we will. I will send it. There we go, and then you can share it on your screen if you want.
Okay.
During your thing. There we go. I don't know how well. It's pretty high res. I could probably actually even zoom in on here, but this is the St. Louis World's Fair 1904 Louisiana Purchase map, exhibit map, Louisiana Purchase exhibit map, basically. So it looks like what they have here is it's an exhibit with all the different states that were part of the Louisiana Purchase, and there's like little areas that I guess they're supposed to represent or be a representation of those states. But why don't you just briefly tell our viewers before you come on camera exactly what you were getting at before about the layout and the secret history and what you were the correlation you were making about the layout of the maps.
All right. Well, I'm going to show this video first, and this explains it all. Okay.
Sounds good.
Share my screen, right?
Yeah. Let me stop sharing mine so you can share yours. Yeah, you should be good to go. Make sure you share your sound too.
All right, let me show you.
See, we had some thieves.
I watched that, and
before
then
Harriet Tubman, we had some real thieves. Congress of Nations.
Hold on, pause it real quick. Say that again.
Actually, I found this video first before I watched the Stolen History. Actually, so this is actually I started going down this road after watching this, and then I came upon the Stolen History little thing.
What's up? What's up? I'm in a museum, as y'all can see. I'm in a museum. Y'all see that? Y'all see our ancient stuff? That's ours. I was trying to take people to another portion of the museum, but they of course got it closed off. Yeah, they got it closed off. So I'm gonna have to go to that one later. What's up? What's up? So I'm at this museum, right? Y'all know I like studying, right? Y'all know I like studying. So I'm at this museum, right? I'm seeing all our stuff around us. Now, it's something funny. I ain't gonna be long. I ain't gonna take y'all time long. What's up, family? Y'all know how we kind of done for the most part with the lives, but I did want to, since I was at this museum, I wanted y'all to catch something. What's up?
Hey, Dottie, move your mouse so that the dashboard thing goes away.
Sorry.
There's some Mississippian people that was over in Cahokia, Illinois. We was building this about 1,000 years ago.
Thank you.
Right, now that's a lie.
You're welcome.
They weren't no Cahokian people. They were Moors, okay? Not only were they Moors, it's funny how when I come into this museum, this is in St. Louis, when I come into the Missouri museum, you see a lot of things like this, but they don't tell you nothing about the Moors. Everything starts from like the 1800s, right? That was like the original White House type thing, right? They don't tell you about that type of stuff in your greatness. Notice they don't got no pictures of people in it either. You know, these just memories of stuff. But I'm gonna show you a little map real quick. I ain't gonna be too long, so y'all make sure y'all share, do what y'all gotta do if y'all want this history to get out to your family. There's some other parts and places that I want you to see too, like just to see your greatness. Now, for those who don't believe that this is Morocco, we got a little proof during this video. Watch this. Watch how this happens. Watch how this works. So, I don't know if y'all ever learned about the Louisiana Purchase. Okay. Now, before they made it one little state, the Louisiana Purchase was a whole middle form of the land, which was over here. The whole land itself was our land. It was called Morocco. I ain't gonna show y'all too much in here because it's some disrespectful. Like the energy in here is just not right. So I want you to focus on one key thing. This is the ground plans of the Louisiana Purchase explosion, St. Louis, Missouri, 1904. Keyword 1904. Now first look at the look at that. You see how the south is up north and the north is down south and the west is east and the east is west. So you see how they flipped already? They didn't flip the compass. So now everybody's direction is off whenever they're looking for something particularly, or whenever they're trying to see where something is or what something is. So key word that I want people to see, yeah, because north ain't south and south ain't north and east ain't west and west ain't east. Little do people know, so they kind of got your brains a little going. Now, I want you to notice there were a lot of things that were over here. Ground plans, it says 1904, right? So Morocco wasn't even founded till 1952. So what is this? You sure this ain't the ancient Jerusalem and ancient Morocco right over here next to Illinois? California was right over here, Temple Inn. You see Japan, right? You see a bunch of little places. Hold on, you see Great Britain. Yes, this is on this land. You see Sweden, you see Cuba, you see China, you see Belgium, yep, Austria. All of these places were over here. All of these places, Italy, all of these places were over here, right on this land specifically, right? And this little thing that you see right here, you see how they got it, a sky view? This is a sky view. This is this that I was just showing you. This is what this looked like from an east to west view. This is what that looked like, baby. When they got over here, that's what they saw, baby. They know what they saw, baby. Greatness. Come on, Moors, stand up. They know what they saw, baby. Greatness. You think we ain't had this whole land on lock? Come on, man. Come on, man. Slaves ain't built no White House, we did. We built all this. Moors did, baby. Ancient Morocco. Now, I'm gonna go back to this, because remember, if the new Morocco was founded in 1952, then that must have been the people that purchased this land and took the Jerusalem from over here and threw it over there. They took Morocco from over here and threw it over there, because we can find letters from George Washington writing to the Sultan of Morocco. So if the Morocco that's established over there in 1952, if that was just established, then this must have been the Morocco he was writing to. That's why they got Cahokia, Illinois, and you also got a Cahokia in what? Exactly, or Cairo, shall I say. You got a Cairo, Illinois, and they say the Cahokia mounds. We got a lot of mounds over here. We were mound builders. They didn't want to call us pyramid builders. They called us mound builders. Let's keep that in mind. You see, we got Tennessee over here, Idaho, fraternity. You see what I'm saying? Look at that. Virginia, Georgia. Come on, man. Like it never stops. You see, Missouri was way up here. So we in Missouri. I'm in Missouri right now, but how Missouri way up here? How is this a map of the land that I'm on right now? But Missouri is just this little teeny place next to Louisiana and Wisconsin and Ohio, New York. Why is New York all the way over here? How is New York all the way over here? Ohio, New York, Massachusetts, Minnesota. So clearly we had these places. North Jerusalem. For those who claim they're Israelites but don't even know where Israel is, this is Jerusalem, the holy city, buddy. Sorry, you got Iowa, you got Mississippi, and mind you, if you're wondering why it looks so confusing, you should be. They flipped your whole world upside down. So you see south is north, north is south, east is west, west is east. So you have to learn a whole new form of directions. And remember, that right there, if you're wondering where that compass comes from, I'll show you. The compass that you see, if you know nothing about the quote-unquote Mayan calendar, they do. It's right there, see? Make windows out of it, make all kinds of signs out of it. Let's keep that in mind. So that's where your compass comes from. This is how we knew how to navigate, right? Seeing that quote-unquote what they call Mayan calendar, what we call it the moral compass and mental magic. Of course, because we do not go by anybody else's names. Yeah, they said that we would never rise again, so hey, I just wanted to show y'all one more time so you can see just how deep this was and how good this particular land itself is. Instead of going everywhere else and looking everywhere else, remember the west is east, the east is west. The north is south, the south is north. So they just kind of had it all flipped up. They kept the symbol the same, but they put the N up here, S down here. W over here, east over there. So now you think this is the west, and we think that's the east. But really everything just kind of been what? Flipped, right? So like I said, this is in 1904, just so you can see. Just so you can see the date, see we're not joking, that's in 1904. Now, if the new Morocco was established in 1925, March 2nd, I think, no, 1952, March 2nd, then who is that? Who is that little? And you see they got the little pyramids within there. Who is that specifically? See Jerusalem, who is that? You see a lot of these different, they say Mexican restaurant, who is that? Who and exactly what was that? You see India, you see Guatemala, you see Puerto Rico. Long before it was divided and separated into corporations and just made corporate states and corporate nations more. So going back to the actual natural nations, you see Cuba, once again up in there, you see Italy. So when you see them talking about us basically running up in this or running up in that and doing that, no, we were basically right over here, buddy. See Annex, see the Philippine, right over here. All this is over here. The Philippine exhibition. You're seeing the top sky view, right? With the information right on the inside of it. Just letting y'all get a little. And you see Arrowhead Lake, right? Arrowhead Lake. You know we got Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, Missouri. Keep that in mind. I don't know if they got any. They got Arrowhead Lake in Kansas City, Missouri. So, just letting y'all know how deep y'all history go. Who changed the names and the locations? Just go look. We didn't. The thing is, it never changed. Nobody can come and just change your home name. You know, when I came in here, they said that these were the Mississippian people. Think about that. Now, Little Egypt is not in Illinois. We need to change that around. Little Cairo is actually over there in Egypt you believe is Egypt. This is the big Egypt. That's why everything is so ancient that it don't even look like we built pyramids over here yet you're walking on them. That's why everything is so ancient that we only know what they told us. Keep that in mind. So no, that's not no Little Egypt. Sorry, that's miseducation. Remember, you're in a school right now. And you being in that school right now, Mental Magic, we have to correct each other and we have to be willing to be corrected. Because remember, they flipped your mind upside down just by flipping your directions upside down. You think north is south and you think south is north. You think east is west, you think west is east. Yep. Kansas City Chiefs, Arrowhead Stadium. Yep. Think about that. So no, this is not no little Egypt. This is big Morocco. This is big Egypt. This is big everything. This is why this is such a big deal. Remember, like I said over here, we got Austria over here, Sweden over here, Holland over here, Great Britain, Cuba, China, Belgium, Brazil, Nicaragua, Siam, Mexico, New York, Puerto Rico, Guatemala, India. And once again, once you look up Morocco, for those who are still confused, look up Morocco, and the one that they established was March 2nd, 1952. This clearly cannot be that because this is 1904, so they were dealing with information long before they created anything new. Let's keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. I keep telling people, yeah, everything has been flipped on us, and as everything has been flipped on us, it's our job to flip it back. Because like I said, we had forests, we had a lot of things. Look at that, South African boar exhibit. Oh, but this ain't Africa? You sure? South African boar. Oh, okay. Okay. So this land ain't, okay. So this, Jerusalem ain't over here for all the Israelites that's confused, right? We got a lot of people over here that's confused, right? We claim Egypt ain't over here for all the Comedics that's confused still, right? Everybody just confused and they don't want to realize the greatness of this land. We're just looking to take it or send it everywhere. We so quick to disrespect our land instead of accepting it. Look at this, Asia was over here. And these are routes, right? These are routes. You see transit loop, like we had train stations, we had all that, Wabash Terminal, the plazas, we had all of that. So it wasn't like we was no bums when they came over here. We wasn't no bums like many people think. Look at that, it says U.S. government. Look, we had our own little government and everything, right? It didn't say United States of America government, it just said U.S. government. And it says Government Hill, and then right above the government terrace was Missouri. That's where I'm at now, Louisiana, like I said, Wisconsin. You got Washington, ain't no Washington, D.C., just say Washington. You see Vermont, you see New Hampshire, you see Michigan. You see a lot of places over here. You see Texas, look at the star on Texas. Don't it look like a turtle island? Uh-oh, you see how it look like a turtle? That's the Moore star right there, but they just centered it out right there. So it looks like a turtle. Here goes the head, here goes the legs, turtle. You see Kentucky right there. You see Germany, oh, but y'all thought all these lands wasn't together. They separated everything. South Dakota, Cahokia, Oregon, Swedenborg. Where's some more at? Mexico, of course, Virginia, Maine, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Indiana. Like I said, New Jerusalem, Indiana Territory, Utah, that came from Putah. Arizona was right over here. So yes. For you that still think our land is everywhere else but here, wake up. For you that still think our stuff is everywhere else but here, wake up. For you to think that we divided and now you see why there are dark people in France, dark people in Brazil, dark people in Nicaragua, dark people in Mexico, dark people in Austria, dark people in Sweden, dark people in Holland, Cairo, dark people. More so, this is old St. Louis, letting you know, so there must be a new St. Louis. Here goes ancient Rome. Oh, you thought Rome was over there? You thought Rome was over there? Rome was never over there. They just put Rome over there. Here go Japan. We got Japan over here. That's why you see melanated people in Japan. Asia was over here. Irish village was over here. Tyrolean Alps right there. And this is just the present, you see, you were here, present location of the Missouri History Museum, blah, 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 blah. So, yep, everything was over here. This is what they won't tell you. Congress of Nations and Rough Riders of the world. Congress of Nations and Rough Riders of the world. Tunnel under tracks. See, we had some thieves. Before Harriet Tubman, we had some real thieves. Congress of Nations and Rough Riders. They called themselves Rough Riders. So we had Rough Riders before DMX. What? Right? I'm dark like this. Right? Look at it. They got the word creation right by there too. What creation of what? You see that target? You see that Mayan calendar looking like thing? And it say Siberian Railroad. You got China right there. Oh, you thought all this stuff was over there though? I know, y'all. I know. Let's just walk through our land real quick. Oh, we had it. Look up the Louisiana Purchase. This is all that was purchased and changed. As you purchase something, you could change it. Right? As you purchase something, you could change it. Keep that in mind. Look at that. Conquest of 19. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Physical culture. Oh, look, we had athletic fields. Oh, snap. Look at that. Look at that. Y'all see that? So once again, yes, your stuff. If you are confused, I'm going to leave you with this. I don't care what you say. They got they tell you where to go. They tell you what's north. They tell you what's south. They tell you what's east. They tell you what's west. Just like they tell you who your friends are, and they tell you who your enemies are. Just like they tell you what your history is. They tell you what your future is. If you allow them to keep controlling everything about you, oh yeah, there goes Canada. For those who think Canada was above us, nope. They took all of the names from these places that we already had. Keep that in mind, and they just placed it to lands that we already owned. I just want y'all to know that. So once again, everything is over here. Everything was over here. And it always will be over here, regardless of whether they move the physical name of it. Keep in mind, like I said, we own everything. So, once again, change your direction in life. Change your direction in your mind. Change your direction of how you treat your family. Change your direction of how you look at history, your story. Change your direction of everything. And when you're reading about these different places, don't attach your mind to where they physically are today. That's what they want you to do. So when you're reading about Morocco and the Moors, they want you to think about the new Morocco that was established in 1952. They don't want you to know about the ancient Morocco that's always been right over here. They don't want you to know about the ancient Morocco and the ancient Moroccans. The same with the Jerusalem and Israelites. Jesus walked over here. When you hear about all of those stories about when Jesus walked into Spain and Italy and Germany, France, and right, that was right over here, buddy. All of that happened right over here. That was never overseas like most people assume. That was never overseas, because remember, if this is the West and they got everything flipped, then that's the West, and this is the East. So since they flipped everything, now we look at our place as the West, and we look at that as the East, not realizing everything has been flipped, and we look at the South as the North, and the North as the South. But here's proof that they never used to have that like that, and they knew if they flipped all these places around, they would have to flip this. Keep that in mind. They knew if they took your information and they flipped all of these places around, they would have to flip this, because South can't be North and North can't be South. East can't be West and West can't be East. So they had to, once they did all that, kind of put the icing on the cake. So keep that in mind when you are reading in these books. And this was in 1904. So just how we proved just with the simple Morocco itself, this wasn't established. You can look up and see when all these dates was established. March 2nd, 1952. So what was this? Who was this? Where was this? What about this? What's all these symbols, right? What's really going on here, right? You sure this was in Africa too? What's really going on, right? Like tell me something. I want y'all to tell me something. I want y'all to tell me something. The fine arts, the festivals. See, we used to run our own festivals, you know, had our little annex fine arts, you know, it was beautiful, man. So when you hear about these places, the lagoon, when you hear about these places, look at that. Electricity and machinery, varied industries, transportation, machinery, steam, gas, fuel building. Hold on, manufacture. So we was doing business, liberal arts. Oh, we was doing big business, baby. These was universities. Mines and metallurgy. Look at that. See, we had our own little stuff going on, but many people don't grasp. We had our own little government over here. So stop. Just read it and accept it, man. Read it and put yourself back together. Whenever you're hearing about Jerusalem, once again, it's your stuff. Whenever you're hearing about Morocco, it's not only your stuff, it's over here. Whenever you're hearing about them talking about Puerto Rican, Guatemalan, India, France, when you hear about Moors going into France and all that, right, Germany, remember all of that was over here. All of that used to be over here. Italy, Cuba, Belgium, China, Great Britain. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But the main thing that I want you to focus on is this. Main thing that I want you to focus on, because that was the center. That was the center. You think it's a coincidence why that was in the center?
Hey, Dottie, how much more is in this video?
Right by the river, going up the river, the trail.
I think our viewers are antsy for an analysis on this video and then the actual documentary we just watched.
A mental image. I'm gonna leave y'all with this mental image. If you want to know the greatness of what our land looked like and how big our ancestors did it, here you go. Here you go. This would have looked like before the White House, big baby. Here you go. Here you go. These type of universities we going to right now, baby. Yup. The globe should be shrinking. Everything should be shrinking. Let's keep that in mind. It's what it used to look like, baby. It's what it used to look like. Now, Morocco is really the whole land. I'm just telling you where, like, our headquarters was more so in the Illinois area, in the Missouri area. That's all. That's why they had to get it. That's why it was so important. The Louisiana Purchase is so important. Look at that. Greatness, baby. This is over here. This is not overseas. This is over here. This is not overseas, baby. Over here, look at that greatness. This is what it used to look like. We wasn't always slaves over here. We wasn't always slaves over here. So I love y'all. Y'all take care. Wanted to leave you with this greatness so y'all could just see just how big you did it and think about it, right? If you want to know the importance of history, this is the importance of it. You got to know this right here. You don't have to go overseas. People coming overseas to see what you have done. People coming overseas to see what your ancestors have accomplished. This is real greatness. Like, this is real right here. This is, y'all see him skipping the video? Look, everything was here. Let's just stop the confusion. I'm just before I leave this video, and there's still more confusion, just for those who don't get it still. Okay, I'm gonna start back over. This is the ground plans, because they wasn't using their minds, so these are ground plans. We make sky plans because we're from the sky. These are the ground plans of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, Missouri, 1904. Now, knowing that this is in 1904 and this is a map, a ground view map, this is a map of this land. If you look up the Louisiana Purchase, they're talking about just the whole middle portion of the land itself. And they had to take the names out of the actual maps when you look on Google because they were renaming things. I mean, what do you think? If they have to, because if you look up the Morocco, if that's 1904, like they say, why is the Morocco that they have today founded in March 2nd, 1952? So one is a corporation, one was a nation of people, right? A tribe of people. The same when you go, like I said, you got New York down here, Great Britain over here. Like, how did all these places ended up over here all of a sudden just get separated and spread it as the corporation starts spreading? Great Britain, Cuba, China, South African. So clearly somebody knew something about this land more than what they were saying. Jerusalem, so many books about Jerusalem and the things that happened in Jerusalem, but
hey, Dottie, why don't we start interpreting this for our viewers?
So therefore, you go to a holy place and you kind of treat it like shit, like a lot of y'all do. A lot of y'all really don't give a damn about this land. But as soon as you go somewhere else, you want to pay it respect. Like that's.
So a couple viewers would like to know. Oh shit! There we go. Oh, sorry about that, folks. I didn't realize I had my video off. So a few folks would like to know exactly how, they would like to know what you found regarding the map and what he's talking about, how it ties into our hidden history or stolen history. Because people are anxious to know, like, what's the what did you find and how do you put it together?
What I was figuring, what I've been finding is that all the stuff was here. So when they bought it, what they did was they made it in, you know how they've made America into a corporation. They just made everything into a corporation, a business, and moved them around, you know, so they put Germany over here, they put this over there, this, you know, whatever, and corporized, you know, made them into a corporation. Because like if you look in the World's Fair, let me pull back up my stuff, hold on. They had like some crazy stuff going on at the World's Fair.
That map finally just sent in the chat. I had to click retry because it was telling me I had a network issue. Oh no, but I got another one for you just in case. It's higher res, you can actually see what's written on it.
I have a map, it's okay.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
Stop sharing. Hold on, let me start sharing again. So if you look at the World's Fair, there's lots of things that are just questionable, like the human zoos that they had, and then how many people they said came to the World's Fair which a lot of people don't know. At the same exact time, we hosted the first Olympics on US soil. Was in St. Louis in 1904, was the very first Olympics over here in the United States. And if you go in and you look at that history and you do reading about that, they barely could get anybody, the athletes barely could
go to page 2 of your presentations.
Okay, so this is the only map. When I look up the Louisiana Purchase, this is the only map that I can find. Why is it not moving? On the internet is this map here. I can't find another map of the Louisiana Purchase. So you just find this, like, you know, just standard basic. I mean, it doesn't show you anything really.
It looks like that was like almost like an advertisement for that expo at that World's Fair. It looks like.
Well, when you look up, so this is the only map I can find of the Louisiana Purchase. So, but when you look up the Louisiana Purchase, the only other thing that comes up is the 1904 world map that he was showing you. Now, that was our history museum he was at here in St. Louis. Okay. And that's displayed as the 1904 Louisiana Purchase map. That's what he was looking at. Those pictures on the wall are actually, when you look in online, those are the pictures you'll find where they say that they're in the 1904 World's Fair photos. Those buildings, everything, you know, and they say that those buildings from the World Fair were made out of paper and linen. And I don't think so. You know, that doesn't seem right. You know,
go on to the next slide so our viewers can see.
So here is an aerial view of the World's Fair 1904. All these buildings are made out of paper and linen to be torn down. They did it in what did they say, 2 or 3 years. They built this entire fair, and this is what they built to sell hot dogs, candy, you know, cotton candy and ice cream cones. Doesn't make sense, does it?
Well, if they were hosting a World's Fair and like, you know, a lot of the, I think like it's kind of like an amusement, kind of like it's like an attraction, I think, is from my understanding. It would make sense, I mean, at least to me, that they would be selling that stuff if it was kind of like, because it looks like that's what they were trying to recreate. Right, but I don't know.
You think of a carnival today, you don't build these kind of buildings to sell cotton candy. I mean,
well, no, but you make money to fund the event by selling.
They didn't make money. Remember, they lost.
They didn't. They did lose money. Well, that tells you a lot. It does.
Right.
Well, now tie that in for our viewers. Tell them what you found regarding that. But continue your presentation though, but tie that in somehow whenever you get.
Well, if you look at the map here, they have all these different things. And when I was doing some research, I come across a blog from some people here because they have an organization, the St. Louis World's Fair organization here in town, and one of the people had received like a brochure of the Jerusalem exhibit, and they didn't even know it existed. They didn't even know it was in the World's Fair. But when you look at that, let me find that photo. I think I have it in here. When you look at that, it's amazing, actually. There it is. There it is. So this is the Jerusalem exhibit. Where'd it go? And it's huge. I mean, it had, look at that. This is another photo of it, but this is like an aerial view of that exhibit. Look how big that is. Like they came in and they really built that wall to like be an exact replica of it. It's kind of questionable. I mean, that's huge.
Well, yeah, it is huge, actually. You're right.
Yeah, well, at the time, the St. Louis World Fair was what, 2 times bigger than the Chicago Fair. It was the largest fair at that time. Like there hadn't been a larger fair.
Okay.
So here's another one. This is the Jerusalem exhibit. Like they built all these walls, and it took them only 2 years to do this. 2, maybe 3. I think
You'd think if they were building it out of easily tear, like what would they call it?
Paper and linen.
Paper and linen. If they were building it out of that, why would it take them freaking 2 years? It should take them quicker than that.
But these
that's
are
something that doesn't. That's what I'm. That's
Here's
what
another. This is a different World's Fair. This is Coney Island, maybe. Look how big this is. Like, and this is another there that they built out of like paper and linen to just tear down. As soon as these fairs were done, they destroyed all of this. Everything would get destroyed right after the fair. They didn't waste any time. I mean, they started tearing shit apart right after. And people got upset about it. Here's another World's Fair. I think this one's in Paris.
Okay.
They would tear this all down when they were done.
Well, I mean, if it's your tradition, like, the modern day fair, like we think of when we have a fair, like with carnival rides and stuff, they tear those down too.
We're right, but those are not these.
Well, I know, but I guess what our viewers are wanting to know is how does it tie into where do we see the circumstantial or otherwise evidence of it being that they've hidden our history from us, like they're claiming in the documentary. That's what I think our viewers are really.
Well, hold on, let me get to. Okay, so they supposedly shipped all these people in. They had these human zoos, and they shipped all these people in to the 1904 World's Fair. Like I was saying, the Olympics was the first time the Olympics were here in the United States. They could hardly get athletes here for the Olympics. People just didn't have the means to travel like that, so that they would just bring in like these whole tribes of people. And then they were putting them on display and as like zoos. Like these were all.
I mean, like as exhibits? Oh, that's unconscionable.
The World's Fair. All of these are. So like, if they can't get athletes in for the Olympics, how are they, having all these people from like these, third world indigenous countries, like, or whatever, how are they getting them here?
Well, they're probably getting them the same way that they got, back in the day when they had, when they had slavery and shit, whenever that was still going on. They probably got them the same way, I would imagine.
Well, even when you talk about that and you see the boats of people coming in, you don't see black people on those boats. When you see photos, you see white people.
Okay, but but still, it doesn't mean that they're not coming in some other way.
Then who are?
Well, I'm just saying historically, when that's been happening, it would make sense that they probably wouldn't. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying. I mean, it's not. They can get them over here. That's not a problem. I'm sure.
Color were already here in the United States. They didn't ship.
Oh yeah, no, of course they were. There was definitely, especially the Native Americans.
That's what he was talking about in that video. He was talking about the Moors and how they had made all these cities, and they came over and they took them over basically, and then had these fairs, and then like burnt down the whole entire history of them, and then stole the kids, like the orphan trains, to repopulate these places.
Now, see that part, I definitely see what you're talking about as far as the subjugation of other cultures and indigenous, especially the Native Americans here, but also like what you're talking about with the what was it called, the orphan train?
The orphan train, yeah. Like here's another tribe.
Now that part, I totally have no doubt that they're probably doing stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that's how those kids weren't just like homeless on the street. They had, their parents were still, most of those kids' parents were still alive. Here's another tribe that was at the World's Fair. They were just bringing in tribes of people. It doesn't make sense, huh?
Well, I think our viewers want to know how does okay. So what? Let's tell her. I would think. I'm really curious to know. Okay, so what do we have as far as what did you find as far as like to show that in fact the cities that we have here are in fact the actual like what like the guy was saying in the video. That's what I think people are confused about.
What was
they want to see some evidence, some indicators, I believe.
Okay, well, see, here, look, let me show you. This is a map of 1878. If you look at it, let me blow it up. If you look at it, it's an octopus, right? And he's taking people and he's moving them around. Like, this is a map. Can I make it bigger? Let me see. And this was in 1878, this map was done. And it's showing you how they were taking people, like these lands, making them into a corporation and moving them around.
You know, it's funny you should mention that because there's also another graphic that's apparently that represents in modern times the deep state tentacles grabbing and reaching out. You know, like it's a modern day kind of thing similar to this. It has an octopus and it shows all the tentacles reaching out to all the different countries, but it's very, very similar, at least symbologically, as far as the imagery goes. I know that would not surprise me in the least because we know that been doing that for years. That they use symbolism.
So this is just, you know, an example of them, like, you know, just taking people and moving things around, because you heard what he said in that video. The second video, the guy said, once you own something, you purchased it, you can do whatever you want with it. So basically what the thing is, it was all here in Missouri, or not Missouri, but in the United States. All these different corporations were here and they just moved them and called them countries and kept them incorporated. So like, that's why you have that World Bank, you know, and everything centered around these people because they're the ones that did it, the elite.
Well, you're talking about the 1% cabal.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. Top of the 1% of the top 1% that are pulling the strings, you know, because of the fact that they own all of it.
Right. So everything that we know has been a lie. Like everything they've taught us is wrong. You know, like what he was saying was Egypt's here. And if you look at a map of Egypt and Missouri and the Mississippi River and the Great Nile, they look exactly alike.
Can you bring up a map of those for our viewers so they can see?
I would have to grab one. I don't have a map of that.
Well, which one, Egypt or Missouri?
Yeah, Egypt.
I can grab that for you.
I'll grab one of Missouri then. So if you put them next to each other, they look just alike. And he was saying that this is Egypt, that Egypt wasn't there, that it's so ancient that the pyramids and the mounds, because St. Louis was called the Mound City. You know, we were full of mounds.
Do you need a map of Cairo or a map of just Egypt?
Egypt with just the map of Egypt.
Okay.
So he was saying that the pyramids are so old here that we're just walking on it. Like it's been worn down. And I know they went to great lengths to get rid of the mounds here in St. Louis. They destroyed them. There's pictures of them like digging them out, like getting rid of them. They didn't want people to know. They didn't want anybody to know about them.
Oh, interesting. This is an interesting map I just found. I'm going to send it to you in the Zoom chat real quick so you can show our viewers.
Go ahead, show them. I'll stop sharing. I'm pulling up this map anyway.
Oh no, it's your presentation. I just wanted to grab a couple for you. I'm letting you do your thing, but let me just put them in the Zoom chat real quick for you.
Go tell me. What is
so Dogtown?
Oh yeah, that's another interesting thing. Dogtown.
When they brought the people from Borneo, it was winter and they were starving. They wouldn't eat local food, so they literally fed them stray dogs.
Oh, they were feeding them dogs. I was seeing articles about that today. Okay, and then another interesting fact about St. Louis is that we are really
there you go, Dottie. They should be in the Zoom chat for you.
Like we have Dogtown, which is what the Dutch, Irish, Dutch, and then we have the Hill, which is all your Italian, kind of like the World's Fair map, like all the different exhibits. And then we have Soulard, which is like our French district. Yeah, so like the city kind of stayed like these exhibits, which is kind of crazy when you think about it.
You know what's crazy is I do see some similarities just from the map you have on your screen and then the map I have right here. If you look, I'm going to share my screen for our viewers real quick. Go ahead and just real quick, if you shit.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. Excuse my language, folks. I hit the wrong thing. Now, look, if you look at the shape, okay, it does kind of look like the shape of Missouri, like no state of Missouri. But then you got the Nile running through here, right? Now, if you go back to the map that she's showing, and go ahead and show your map of Missouri again.
Okay.
Maybe even bring up the one I sent, the ones that of Egypt I sent in there up side by side if you can. Now you got the Mississippi River running to the right of here. It's like there are a lot of parallels that are very, very odd. Like, look, I mean, it makes an interesting point because St. Louis, if you want to think about it symbologically. Oh my God, I can't even pronounce that word. Well, how do you pronounce? Is it symbologically? Anyways, you know what I'm saying. I feel like I had a Freudian slip tongue twister there for a minute. It does. There are some interesting similarities because, like, St. Louis that's the main city for that place. Cairo's the the main one for right along the Nile. This one's right along Mississippi. There are definitely some similarities. It does look like Cairo a little bit.
Like
That's what I'm saying.
And I can't pull up your map. That's why I asked you to do it because my system's really old. My computer system.
Yeah. Well, send me this one so I can do that.
Well, this I just have it. I don't have this.
I'll bring it up. I'll bring it up. I got it.
Okay, I'm just on the internet. It looks very similar. Like, it's crazy how similar they are. And it makes sense about the orphan trains when you just start putting all these different things and you start adding them up. You start to think about how can it be anything other than this, because this kind of adds up. You can.
Oh, they're not liking that we're exposing this. It says my internet connection's unstable.
Yeah.
Cox cable throttling my internet again. Fucking bastards. It's all right. We got a hotspot we can switch to if it keeps giving us issues, so I'm not worried about it.
My shit's frozen.
It's probably because my internet was unstable. Which it shouldn't be because we're paying for high-speed internet.
Mm-hmm.
Tigers, which is
oh, you can talk.
There we go.
And if you notice, all the towns on the Illinois side, they're all
that's not the one I wanted. Or the other one. There we go.
And that's because this was supposed to be the Nile. And this was
okay, my friend Mark's here. Go ahead and tell him. Go ahead and tell him what you're just telling me.
So if you ever look at the map of the Mississippi River in St. Louis specifically, it kind of divides off where the Mississippi gets a tributary, which is the Illinois River. And so if you notice, all the towns on the Illinois side, they all have some kind of biblical significance. There's Nebo, Mount Sinai, there's Mount Vernon, and that basically goes all the way up to the Dakotas. And the reason is because a lot of the old timers would say that this was actually, like your guys are asserting, it's actually Egypt.
And, the old.
And so if you look at it, it's literally like that. And there's even a place in Jerusalem where the map is set up, and if you place it right basically where the big mound was, which was basically where
here in St. Louis, right where the what is it, the JB Bridge is? Yeah, so we have a famous bridge where it's placed now.
That was the last big mound that was tore out, and they got one rock left, but it was 20 stories tall. It took them 6 months to get rid of it with slave labor and Indian labor.
Yeah, 6 months to get rid of a mound and 2 years to build the World's Fair.
So you have to remember too, when St. Louis was founded, it was supposed to be the new Paris. And so
it was.
Yeah. So the first capital of the United States.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Is in St. Charles. And so they'll lie to you about that, but that's the truth. And that's because that's what they had planned it to be. And it's kind of odd to see that it kind of later got adopted to New Orleans because of the flood stuff that happened in the 1800s.
Right.
So if you remember what Dickie would say, he would say that trader, he would talk about how the King Louis thing, and it's because there's two King Louis.
Makes more sense now.
And it's because really in the 1600s, that was really where America was supposed to start. It wasn't going to be in DC, and it was only because the Knights of the Round Circle that broke that up. And definitely solidified when they tried to attempt this, the assassination of
John F. Kennedy.
Of Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, Abraham Lincoln.
The Knights of the Golden Circle basically thought that because this was the Holy Land, that would mean that basically from all the way in a circle from Mexico, Texas, Louisiana to Florida and through the
Let's see what similarities we can find with the layout St. Louis and Cairo and make some some interesting. Because
Well,
I know there's
everything east of that river in the United States are all everything's named biblical. Like
it's poised just like it is. So Egypt, being where the pyramids were, that would be like the lower part of St. Louis. And if you're looking, say northeast,
and that's why we were called the Mound City, huh?
All those towns would be
that makes sense. If you think about it, it's like they're trying to replicate what's over there, over here, basically. Or the reverse of that.
Because they made them they turned them into corporations, and they made America a corporation. They made everything a corporation at that time, isn't it?
Yeah, so it was all big money, and it was all part of the French and Indian War. And before we ever had our own Civil War, and the French were decimated by the Indians, and then later the British and the Indians, and they paired. And so
you want to go ahead and I've shown our viewers. Do we have? So you said all to the left of the Mississippi are all like biblical names?
No, so to the right.
To the right, all the east, which would be the west, because
remember, the right.
He was saying they flipped our compass upside down.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why everybody's used to it. Some people say this world's upside down, it's backward. Well, it literally is.
Look at that! Look at this. I don't know if there's, but you got Millstat, then you got
that's right across the river.
Then you got Fustat right here.
All those are Hebrew translations.
You see the placement of that, but that's pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah.
It's almost like another representation, because it looks like they named this. It was inspired by the inspiration of this. I mean, like they're trying to replicate the layout almost.
That's absolutely right. That's why St. Louis looks like a pinwheel or like a wagon wheel on its design, instead of the normal square grid cities like most cities were.
Oh yeah, we go crazy.
And that's because that was all the design of the what was the name of it? It was filling with water.
What else can we find here?
By Karnak, but that's literally why it's like that.
That makes sense. So I don't know. What do you think, Stephen?
I get what you're saying. I do think that they did replicate a lot of the layout of stuff over here from like over there to kind of mimic it, because you got to remember the ancient knowledge that they are aware of that most people are not, that some people are aware of now, because it's always been poo-pooed in the media. It's something called ley lines, and there's certain energy, there are certain areas on the earth that are convergence points for energy and stuff, and portals even, but the ley lines are a part of that. And this is ancient knowledge we've forgotten, or that's been how do I put it, made to look like nonsense or crazy talk, in the mainstream, if you even consider. But if you got to remember, over before the not too long ago, a little less, maybe a little bit over 100 years ago, it was mainstream science to talk about something called ether.
Right.
Okay. And that was mainstream back then, but they don't talk about that anymore. It's been poo-pooed since. But when you hear ether, people think, oh, that's new age. No, it's not. Ether is meant that which they cannot. It's to describe the non-physical aspect that we cannot see, taste, or touch. But we have indicators that is there. Like today, we call it dark matter or dark energy, whatever you want to call it. But the ether was used to describe the non-physical aspect of things that are going on that interact with our world that are not yet quite explainable, that we don't have a genuine, but that was a common belief. The ether, that was a mainstream scientific idea or concept back in, for many days, probably hundreds of years. It's not that way anymore, but we all know why.
They don't want you to know about ether, really.
Exactly. Huh? They don't ever want you to know anything that will empower yourself and make you independent from the control mechanisms they have set up. That's why we had the formation of the AMA, from the Rockefellers back in the day, because they're trying to control everything and everybody. And for them, it was all about making money.
They have control. They've been successful at it.
Exactly. And then you got the freaking Federal Reserve, which is not a federal institution, people. It's a privatized banking cartel. And, they say, oh, well, it says federal, it's called the federal, the Fed. Well, yeah, they did that for a reason, to trick you motherfuckers into thinking that it was federal or part of the federal government. Excuse me, but it just like, it's right in your face.
So there's a history behind that.
But there, it's pretty plain and obvious if you ask me these days. I mean, just especially what's happened in the last couple of years, I think it's really woken a lot of people up. And the fact that we know that they lied on such a massive scale and committed such mass crimes of against humanity these last couple of years, we really need to start questioning what else did they lie to us about. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to
everything they've lied to us about, everything. There's nothing they haven't lied to us about.
We don't know what the true history is because it's been hidden. And would we even know? Would we have any way to know if they always say the victors always write history. It's the victors who write the history. Well, that being said, what have they left out that they're not telling us? And how would we know if there was something? We wouldn't know. We really wouldn't unless we started to look and start looking, And I think that's important that all of us as individuals start using our own discernment, our own critical thought, and our own logical thinking skills, and start doing some of our own common sense investigating. I encourage all of our viewers to start looking into these things yourself. The internet is a great tool for us to do that, and there's so much information. If you just take the time to look, you can find pretty much anything you're looking for. And everybody has to become an independent,
but you also have to
independent investigator, right? Well, yeah, true. But see, here's the thing: most people, the ones that think, oh, this is all nonsense and hooey and yada yada. Well, most of them don't ever take the time to look.
Right.
So that's my point. If you take the time to look, you will see that clearly this is, there's so much info out there that indicates a lot of this stuff having, that we've been lied to for so many years about so many different things, and they're not hiding it anymore. They're not hiding it at all. It's out in plain broad daylight. So anybody that would go to look can verify this for themselves. And I encourage every individual, if you're skeptical of anything that we are talking about, I don't encourage you to take my word for it. Look into it yourself. That's what I encourage everybody to do. That's what we want everybody to do, because that's how we regain our power back.
You have to look into it for yourself.
So what's important?
Do you want to finish a few more slides from that presentation you put together, and then we'll wrap it up?
Hold on, please.
Go ahead,
Mark. So this is what's important for all of your listeners is to, if you want to learn about this, is one thing is that for the endless times here, all these things are all hidden in the humanities, the arts. That's why it's so important to keep these things in our schools and our communities, because like the dollar bill, everybody knows about the the all-seeing
eyes on the dollar bill. Yeah,
the Freemasons, it's debatable if they were corrupted or not. I'm not going to get into all that because I don't need any problems. But I mean, if you think about it, the reason why all these artists, you think about the Da Vinci Code, all this stuff, there's a reason why they have to keep these things going, because it's all hidden in there. It's not something that you don't have to look very hard for. It's right there in front of your face.
No, it is. It totally is. You're absolutely right.
And they've done it systematically. I mean, and so who's to say how long they've been doing it? But I would say a pretty good start would be when Machiavelli wrote The Prince. That was basically a blueprint for the Pope and the.
Say that one more time. When?
So when Machiavelli wrote his most famous book, which is The Prince, it is basically it's a blueprint guide to and their indoctrination. And the Pope and every king and queen since then and president has used these same techniques. Sigmund Freud's nephew, his name was Edward Bernays. He was basically, we get propaganda from this guy. He was born in the late 1800s, but he was like 106 when he died. He's basically the father of all propaganda and all subliminal messages or all advertising. And it's because he had some inside secrets that obviously, Freud was kind of a pervert probably, but there was some truth to these things. And he used these. I mean, we wouldn't be smoking in the United States. Women wouldn't. He definitely coined. That was like right around the world.
Dottie, go ahead and share your screen. Get ready to finish up the slides.
As a matter of fact, Edward Bernays was basically put in charge of every World's Fair until they ended. And every war the United States ever got into that was basically false under the freedom of under the ruse of democracy or freedom, he coined that.
Right.
I mean, he was hired single-handedly from the group from the OSS before World
War.
And
something interesting is that when the 1904 World's Fair held the World's Olympics for the first time in the United States, the creator of the Olympics didn't even show up. He didn't even come to him because he didn't want him here in St. Louis. He wanted him in Chicago.
All about money.
They like the strong-armed and got the Olympics here in 1904.
Yeah. So the next one was when Edison and they all fought over the light bulb. That was the biggest thing since then.
And that was during the World's Fair.
That was a publicity stunt by Edward Bernays. And it was all because they didn't want to use DC current instead of AC. And so to basically prove their point, one of them basically shocked a live elephant and killed it in front of people. And that was like done in Chicago because of that. And that's how we have our current today. But it was all, during the first execution. The very next thing they did was execute the first prisoner in the United States with the same technology.
Oh, that's terrible.
And they did that because they didn't want people to do, it's part of the free energy. That's the ether that you're talking about.
Right.
Dottie, you want to go ahead and finish up showing your slide presentation? I got to go make dinner real quick, but I'm just going to kind of do that while you finish up here. I don't know how long you want to take, but you got a few, I see 20 something slides or more. So go ahead and finish up your presentation and kind of explain it briefly for our viewers over so they can get a basic understanding. And then if you'd like to compile that and upload it, we can put it on the pages and the channels for everybody to take a look at.
Not a problem.
Awesome.
Again, this is the world's 1904 Louisiana's Purchase Expedition ground map to the ground map. Yeah. This is the exact same map of the 1904 World's Fair. And when you look at it, it has all Jerusalem here. It's got the Moroccos because they say they stole this land from the Moroccos.
Yeah.
Are is that Moroccans?
What they were trying to do was they were trying to get people to move out of the cities and more west. So that was after Frederick Douglass wrote his book to the west, that was the last frontier. That was their ploy to get that to work, and it worked by far and large. Segregation was going on. After the Civil War, blacks were free to go wherever they wanted.
And they flipped your compass around on us.
Yeah, they did a lot to undermine the advancement of not just the black people or Indians, but everybody in general. This is the same time that the school stops teaching the old ways for mathematics and English.
But you want to know another interesting thing about this map is right here, this Grand Basin. What does this look like to you? To me, it looks like a brain. Do you know what I mean? Or the spine, it's something to do with the body for sure.
What I think it looks like, I don't want to say.
No, but it's not that. It's like, this is your third eye, maybe up here at the top. Like this is like an image of from the top of the brain.
Yeah.
That's what it's, because it's all connected. To me, I see something there.
This is why when you go to Forest Park today, there's only a few buildings left because they were tore down like that. They were made cheap.
All of them. Okay, and this is the Jerusalem exhibit. I find this one so interesting that they built this in last 2 years. They have this great wall built around it. From what I understand, this was like 20 blocks, which is pretty big.
All the way down.
And here's a closer image, like inside the walls. And look how big these other world fairs are. And they just would tear them down. They would just rip them down when they were done. And they built them in just a few short years. And then here's some more of the, again, the zoo of humans that they would put on display every day at the 1904 World's Fair.
Most of them died, by the way.
Most of them died.
Yeah, because I couldn't feed them. You can't feed somebody fried chicken that doesn't eat it. These people were hunter-gatherers, more or less, man. They literally fed them. They let them turn them loose, and they killed dogs because that's what they would eat. It's like the guineas over there. That's why they call Dogtown Dogtown.
Got it.
It's literally, it's not because they're Irish. They literally hunted dogs.
Here's another exhibit at the World's Fair. To me, I don't see them building all of this in 2 years.
No, they didn't.
And more of the human zoo.
That's Edward Bernays there on the end.
Who's that?
The guy, the nephew from Sigmund Freud. All the way
on
the right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. He was the guy in the middle is Edward Mandel House. He was Monroe's.
This man?
Yeah.
And who was he?
So he was another propagandist. Basically, he was an advisor to Woodrow Wilson. He's the reason why we have the great monetary fund, and we don't own our own money.
This is the Belgium, I believe, exhibit from the World's Fair. They have it like built into this mound, basically.
That's what it is. And that's part of Bibo.
Yeah, the Bibo Mill. Okay,
that's what that is.
But this is actually built into the earth right here.
Well, that was there.
Yeah, it was there. That was one of the mounds. Yeah.
That would be like between Gravelways and Waterford. That's
crazy. And here, July 17th in 1904, some cartoons they depicted out of the news. This was in the newspaper. The cartoon on the front page of the Post-Dispatch lampoons and the pygmies on their desire for money to separate us, to create division. And this is another article out of the newspaper. It's of them here in St. Louis after the exposition closes. So this is the different groups of people from their animal zoo that, this is what you can do with them. But if they were just here to visit for the World's Fair, why would they not go back home? Like, why would they have to find a way to have something to do with these people, use the noble red man for political purposes, which they have done, I don't know. It just, why would they have a cartoon like this? And then this is a postcard from the Olympics. And so is this from the 1904 World's Olympics, which nobody really talks about at all being here. And then here's a photo of the incubators of the preemie babies that they would put on display. Which is like the beginning of really disassociating, societies to their history. Because once you take their children, they disassociate. You can steal their history from them, which that is what we're seeing with our family courts and all the child trafficking and craziness that's going on right now with CPS. It's the same thing. Another picture from the Olympics in St. Louis. And that building looked like a brick building. So I don't know how they ripped these buildings down and put them up and then ripped them down so quickly. And here's another image of the Olympics. This man throwing a spear. And this is a picture of the Olympics. This is the field that they were in. Massive ground land, sorry, I'm having a mind fart. The land, the miles and miles of land, like this was not just any carnival. And a ticket to the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, which is the World's Fair. And then it goes into the orphan trains when they started stealing all the children. Wow. So the Aryan children during the Third Reich, 20,000 children were born to racial pure women who slept with SS officers in a 12-year period. More than stolen children. Then once they took over these kids, what they did was they put them in these places to start these cities, no, they're not going to answer anything. They said they started moving everybody around, making these corporations into countries and moving the people around. This is where they went. They took all the children. These are the states they went to. It's crazy. So none of them went to Arizona or Mississippi. Missouri got 5,000 to 10,000 children. 33,000 from New York. So what my theory is they were bringing them in by boat from stealing them from other places, bringing them in by boat, and then spreading them across the country to populate the country, basically. A lot of them ended up here in Missouri. They would put them on display, kind of like they do today. They kind of do something like that today with children. It's crazy. I don't know where Steven went. I guess he's not coming back, but that's all I have for today. Like, really, you just need to do your own searching and research and look into it. It really, really changed my whole perspective on things and gave me an understanding what is going on today with the kids and everything, and with the corporations and how they've taken and they've tricked us into believing that we're US citizens when really they've made us a fiction corporation with our names by taking our birth certificate and literally our souls by the soul print of your foot, and literally taking like your soul and making you into this corporate fiction where they like take and use you, you know, for your energy and money. Oh,
I'm right here. I was watching on the big TV out in the living room while I was cooking.
So you were cooking.
Yeah, I'm cooking dinner for myself
But,
and my
you know,
madre.
Stephen, all of that just folds right into the orphan trains and them stealing all these children and stuff, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
there's so much. If you can go in so depth, like you can just take one little aspect of this and like we could talk forever on just one little part. But
are we ready to wrap it up? Are you finished with your presentation?
well, these are the only photos I have. These are all I could get in to the program, but there's a lot of other photos. If you go and you look at the Philippines exhibit,
I would love to do a follow-up episode and do a real deep dive on this subject and see what we can find.
Well, if you look at the exhibits and some of the photos from the World's Fair of 1904 here in St. Louis,
I'll be right back. I'm just gonna go finish cooking. I got food on the stove. I'm gonna go finish cooking that up, and then we'll wrap up the live. Okay.
The Philippine exhibit's really, really interesting, and I cannot find anything on the Jerusalem exhibit. Hardly anything. Like, a lot of people didn't even know that exhibit was even at the 1904 World's Fair. So it's, I don't know. You guys just have to make your own decision and decide what you guys think. I myself think that everything's a lie and that there is a lot of truth in this, and that this is what was happening, that all this stuff was here and they bought it, made it all into corporations and moved it all around, and have had us in control and in slavery because of this for all these years, by stealing our history and not letting us know who we are or where we're from, and what truly was going on. I find it, you know, really interesting. When then you have the mudslides and, you know, the mud cities where they were like underground cities just were, you know, were demolished or gone by mud. And then the fact that every World's Fair had some crazy fire happening. They burnt down some kind of building. It was usually arson or something, you know, at every single fair, or actually in every city, that when you go back and you start looking into their history, they've all had a fire. Like the fire in Chicago that destroyed the town, that was around the time they had a World's Fair. But all of these places had fairs or fires, and they ripped these places down as soon as these fairs were over with. They started demolishing buildings. And, you know, like in that video, they were showing photos of the buildings being supposedly built, but you can tell that those are photos of being, you know, these buildings being demolished. And it's all over the world. Like, if you start looking into like old history of basically anywhere, you could just spin the globe and pick a place. You're going to find like a fire. You're going to find hidden, you know, histories that just don't add up, you know, like the artwork or something that just doesn't add up because of all the lying and all the moving around and everything that they've done to keep us entrapped into enslavement, basically, is what it is. But like this map, it shows how that everything was here. They had the whole train system, And, you know, St. Louis has been a corrupt city since I want to say since the development of it, because they were talking about the corruption of 1901 during the fair, the corrupt cities. And even before then, there was a bunch of corruption that went on in St. Louis with like the trolley cars. I think they were like trolley cars that they had in our downtown area that no longer exist. But, you know, corruption's been here since the beginning, I think, of this city, which has been around for a long time. Let's see, another interesting thing is the government positioning here. Why would they have US government building at the World's Fair? Or why would they work so hard to keep the World's Fair in a like old world design and it be so intricate with it, when what it was for was new modern technologies to come out and be introduced, to pay attention to such old, you know, details of old history is kind of interesting in itself, to think why would they do that. Just doesn't make sense. Let's see. I'm gonna go pull up the 1904 World's Fair because I didn't get time to pull them into this program.
Back. I am back. Are we about ready to wrap it up?
Yeah.
Cool.
I was just trying to pull up some photos of the buildings from the 1900 World's Fair, because like I was just saying that, you know, it doesn't make sense for it to be modern technology that they were introducing to make such detailed of old modern or old history, like old world. You know, why would they make the buildings to be old world when it was about modern technologies and things that they were developing and coming out with and introducing to the people? But they've made so much details in these old buildings.
Well, we should definitely touch on that in the follow-up episode for sure, I think.
Because like this, for example, is one of the buildings here in the 1904 World's Fair. And this was built of paper and linen that they tore down right afterwards.
Okay.
Like, does that look like something that was made out of paper and linen?
Well,
I don't know.
paper and linen, I mean, it could be their slang for paper mache. I mean, you know, from back in the day, I mean, it sounds like very
How
similar.
do you make a building out of paper mache, man? I can barely keep like a balloon paper mache.
Oh my God, you know, I could show you sometime. When I was a kid, me and my dad used to get chicken wire, right? And we would mold, you know, wrap it around what it, you know, in the shape we wanted to make, and then we would put paper mache over it. You know, with you mix flour and water, and then take a newspaper and you cover it over, and then you paint it. So we actually made a shark one time, I believe. I don't think we ever finished it, but we started it.
Really?
Yeah, you can do all sorts of cool stuff like that if you know how to do it.
Cool. Well,
yeah.
I tried with a balloon, and I don't even have luck with keeping paper mache going with a boat, like around a
Well,
balloon.
a balloon's not exactly the best because it can pop, and then if it's not dried, your whole paper mache project will collapse.
How did they get the camels here? I want to know. Look at these camels. This is at the World's Fair of 1904.
Who knows? They could have. Who knows?
Like,
maybe.
Do you think traveling was that simple in 1904?
Well, they did have ships.
No.
May have been, you know, it may have been taking a minute to get overseas, but you know, they did have that capability. I would, you know, who knows?
Who knows, right?
We may never know, but it's important we keep looking into these things and use critical thought and you know, and discernment and start to put the pieces together. But I think it's important.
Airships. Look at this. This was at the 1904 World's Fair.
Interesting. But I think it's important though that people that we listen to other perspectives and you know, other viewpoints, because if we don't, then we will never grow. And it's important to have that conversation, because regardless of our views or our perspectives, we can all learn something from the interaction and the back and forth. And you know, there's always something new to learn, and I think that's going to be a critical key aspect of you know, as moving forward as a society, if we're going to move forward, instead of and purge ourselves of all this tyranny and all this top-down control, or we can't even voice our dissent. Like if we're going to move forward in a new world, we need to have those conversations and have respect for other people's views, and while at the same time being objective and trying, and learning something from it. I think that's important, and I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we had a great show. I mean, we had live viewers all throughout the whole thing. It was a good 3 hours and 28 minutes. So we're going to wrap it up. And normally we don't have such a long show, but I wanted to give time for the analysis and all the stuff that Dottie put together to present for us to cover. So we will be doing next week. I think we're going to do a follow-up to our first episode. And we're going to be sharing some more footage of some recent sightings, some recent unexplained sightings, potential UFO sighting stuff. So you must send some more ISS
some more
live feed captures of stuff we can't explain like that. I think that would be interesting follow up, because there's been quite a bit of activity. There's been NASA officially announced it's going to start investigating UFOs last week. So we're going to touch on that too. That's huge because never, if they're officially saying they're going to look into, you can't get much more mainstream than that, as far as that subject goes. It's official, people. It's been acknowledged. UFOs are real. They're responsible for unexplained pregnancies, according to a DIA report released out of the Pentagon.
People.
Huh?
That's a tactic to scare people.
Oh no, I know it is. But for those that don't know that, sometimes it takes that mainstream to acknowledge something for them to believe it. And that's just that's the reality.
Jesus was born.
So to bridge that gap, I'm just saying, that's a good way.
That's exactly how Jesus was born.
Oh yeah. I would not be surprised at all. I mean, it makes the most sense. Yeah. All right, everybody, have a great night. We appreciate you watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our Rumble and YouTube channels. Follow our Facebook pages and like them as well. And don't forget to hit the like button if you're on YouTube, Rumble, or on Facebook. And we will give you we will be doing our Friday episode of Tips, Techniques, and Survival Traits, and we will be covering some updates regarding monkey. I don't want to say it. Mpox, and other things related to this. But because of the YouTube censorship, we will not be streaming on YouTube because we'll get our channel taken down because we're covering a lot of controversial topic or subject matter. So we will be look for it on Rumble, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, some others, but it will not be on YouTube because I'm not trying to get all of our sacred Lovisa work and Fringe divisional work taken down from YouTube. So so we're going to try and just avoid that altogether.
Well, just call that stuff what it is. It's shingles.
Oh yeah, of course. Of course it. I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's another scare tactic and another attempt at fear mongering because they know they're losing control of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good night, everybody. Don't forget to check out the FU Family Court Bonfire store or the Just Heat Bonfire store. That's bonfire.com/FU-Family Court, or is it Family-Court or Family Court?
I'm not sure.
All right, I'll bring it up. It's it's bonfire.com/FU-Family-Court. And then also we have bonfire.com/just-TD, Just Teed. So if you buy anything from those two shops, the funds will go directly to the CPS and Family Court Corruption Victims Fund, which is managed by Dottie.
Thank you.
So we are not for profit. We are doing this voluntarily on our own free time. Well, partly because it's, we like doing this kind of stuff. It's fun, and we enjoy bringing information to people. So everything we cover under here should be covered under fair use. So Facebook, if you want to think about censoring our shit over again over a copyright, like a 30-second copyright, claim, be my guest, but I guarantee you we're going to take your business from you. So anyways, That being said, good night, everybody.
Good night.
We look forward to seeing you on Friday. Good night.